Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I work the night shift at a small gas station just outside town. The kind of place where the streets are empty and the only sounds come from the occasional car or the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It wasn't a bad job, mostly quiet, but sometimes that silence got weird. One night, maybe a few months ago, I was doing my usual rounds, checking the pumps, sweeping the floor, making sure the bathrooms weren't a disaster. It was close to 2 a.m., and I was the only one on site. The store was small, nothing fancy, just a few aisles with snacks, drinks, and the usual stuff. The security cameras covered the pumps, the inside of the store, and in the parking lot. I kept an eye on the monitors out of habit, even though nothing really happened here after midnight. Around 2:05, I noticed something strange on the security feed for the parking lot. There was this sudden bright flash of white light, like a camera flash, but way bigger and brighter. It didn't last more than a second, but it lit up the whole lot like daylight for that brief moment. The weird part was that the timestamp on the footage jumped forward 6 minutes, from 2:05 to 2:11:12. It was like the camera skipped over those 6 minutes entirely. I rewound the tape, played it again, but it did the same thing every time. 1 second I'd see the flash, then bam, 6 minutes missing. The footage right before and after looked normal. No glitches or anything. I thought maybe it was a malfunction in the camera or the recorder, but everything else on the system was working fine. The audio didn't pick up any unusual sounds either. No static, no hum, nothing. I went outside to check the lot, just in case something had happened out there. The pavement was dry, no tire marks or footprints that didn't belong. The pumps were fine, nothing damaged or out of place. I looked up at the sky, clear, a few stars, no clouds. There wasn't a plane or helicopter flying over, at least none I could see or hear. At first I figured it was just some weird electrical interference or a power surge messing with the cameras, but the timing was too exact. 6 minutes to the second missing from the timestamp. That stuck with me. Later, I checked the logs from the gas station's computer system. No transactions, no door alarms, no motion alerts for that time frame. The lot was empty the whole time, and the cameras showed no cars pulling in or out during those missing 6 minutes. It was like nothing happened. I told my manager about it the next day, but he just brushed it off as a tech glitch. Said cameras sometimes mess up, especially older ones. I tried to drop it, but something about it kept nagging me. Over the next few nights, I watched the footage from the same camera closely, hoping to catch whatever caused that flash or the missing time. Nothing. No flashes, no jumps, just the same empty parking lot and quiet nights. But then, a few nights later, around 2 a.m. again, I noticed something else. On the video feed, a shadow moved just outside the frame near the edge of the lot. I only caught it for a second, like a figure standing still, but it wasn't in any of the other camera's views. I checked the angle, and it seemed impossible for anyone to be there without being visible from another camera or by me outside. I went out and walked the whole perimeter, but there was nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had been there recently. After that, I started feeling like I was being watched during my shifts. Not in a usual way, like someone standing right there, but more like a presence beyond sight. I'd hear noises, small things like a faint rustling or the distant buzz of something electronic, but when I looked, nothing was around. The night after I saw the shadow on the footage, I decided to sit outside for a bit during my break. I figured maybe I was just going stir crazy in the store. It was a clear, cold night, and I was leaning against my car, watching the lot. After a while, I noticed a small, dim light flickering in the distance beyond the edge of the gas station's property, near the tree line. It wasn't a car or a flashlight, just a steady, blinking white light. I thought maybe someone was camping or doing something back there, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked over, staying close to the edge of the lot. The light disappeared as soon as I stepped off the pavement and into the grass. I called out a few times, but no answer. It felt like it was gone before I even got close. I got back to the lot and tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a flashlight from a nearby campsite or some reflection from a distant road. But the whole thing didn't sit right with me. The next day, I pulled the security footage from that night to see if the light showed up on camera. I watched the timestamp closely. At exactly 2:03:45, the camera caught a bright flash again, similar to before, but this time it was fainter, like a dull glow. Again, the timestamp jumped forward, this time 4 minutes missing, from 2:45 to 2:07:45. The footage after the jump showed the lot empty, no signs of anything out of place. I started writing down the times these flashes and jumps happened. There wasn't a pattern I could make sense of. Sometimes 6 minutes missing, sometimes 4, sometimes just 2. The flashes happened only at night, always in the early morning hours, and only on that one camera covering the parking lot. I began feeling less safe there, not because I thought someone was going to rob the place, but because of how quiet and wrong it felt. Like something was just beyond my vision, messing with the cameras and maybe with me. One night, near closing time, I heard a soft hum outside. It wasn't like a car or a machine, more like a steady vibration in the air. I stepped outside and scanned the lot. The hum got louder for a few seconds, then stopped. I didn't see anything unusual, no lights, no movement, just the night and empty pumps. I kept watching the cameras for a while, hoping to catch whatever was causing this, but every time I looked, the footage showed nothing except empty lot and the usual flickering of the streetlight. The last night I worked there, about a week ago, the flash happened again. Bright white light that filled the screen for a second. The timestamp jumped 6 minutes again. I watched the footage right after, paying close attention. Then, at the edge of the frame, I thought I saw a shape, just a dark blur moving slowly out of view. I rewound and played it back several times. It was subtle, maybe just a trick of light, but I swear it wasn't there before. I left my shift early that night, feeling shaken. I haven't gone back since, and I'm not planning to. Every time I think about it, about those missing minutes and the flashes, I get this strange feeling that something was there, something I can't explain. I checked the footage one last time before deleting it from my phone. The bright flash, the missing time, the blurry shape, all still there staring back at me from the screen. I don't know what it was or why it happened, but I know it wasn't just a glitch. I was cleaning out my basement last winter and found this old portable hard drive tucked in a storage bin. The label just said ATC Backup 2002-2007, and I knew right away what it was. I used to be an air traffic controller out of the regional center just outside Wichita. I did that for 27 years before I retired. Anyway, back then we had a policy where controllers could save radar playback logs for training or error review, and I used to copy interesting ones to my personal drive sometimes. Stuff like close calls, odd traffic patterns, that sort of thing. All from unclassified commercial routes. Nothing sensitive. I plugged the drive in that night, mostly out of nostalgia. I opened a few logs in our old playback viewer, and it was exactly how I remembered. Little green and yellow blips scooting across the screen, each tagged with altitude, squawk code, call sign if it was on file. It brought me back. There was one file named unassigned score 0429 2005 0344Z. That's how the system labeled unsaved autologs. Random captures it saved when something flagged a warning but didn't meet criteria for an incident report. Most of those were garbage, so I almost skipped it, but for some reason I opened it. The display loaded to a wide-angle view centered roughly southwest of Wichita. The timestamp showed April 29th, 2005 at 3:44 Zulu, which would have been about 10:44 p.m. local time, middle of a routine night shift. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just one regional jet climbing through FL 220 heading west. No weather returns, no restricted airspace. But about 20 seconds into the playback, a tag blinked on out of nowhere at the top of the screen. FL 700. That's 70,000 feet. We don't track anything at that altitude, just not in that airspace. Even the high-flying military platforms like U-2s are rare, and when they come through, they're well coordinated with squawk codes and escort spacing. This thing had no transponder return, just a skin paint, meaning the radar caught a solid object with no identifying info. I zoomed in and froze it. The return wasn't strong, but it was consistent. It showed up on 3 sweeps in a row, which meant it wasn't a glitch, and it didn't move. It just hovered there. I looked at the location again, and that's when it got weird. It was directly over the neighborhood where I lived at the time. I pulled up a map and confirmed it. The blip sat just east of Clearwater, Kansas, right above the house we'd lived in for 12 years. I remember because we moved out the next year. It hovered at 70,000 feet, stationary, for about 14 seconds. Then, without any acceleration curve or directional change, it disappeared. No drift, no fade, just gone between one sweep and the next. Now that by itself would be strange enough. But then I remembered something. That same night back in 2005, I had trouble sleeping. It was a Thursday. I was off that day, and I remember being up late. Our son was in high school then, and he'd just started sneaking out sometimes. I thought I heard the back gate creak, so I got up and looked out the kitchen window. I didn't see him, but I do remember noticing a weird buzzing in the house, like an electrical hum, but uneven. It would fade in and out every few seconds. I actually walked around trying to find the source, checked the fridge, the thermostat, even the breaker box. Nothing. I went back to bed, and by the time I woke up, I'd forgotten about it. Seeing that radar blip years later brought the whole thing back. I replayed the log about a dozen times, tried different filters, different playback speeds. The return was always the same, barely there, but clear. Altitude held at FL 700 and position never changed. It didn't match any aircraft profile. There were no scheduled flights at that level, and the FAA wouldn't have authorized anything over civilian airspace without coordination. I even checked the original incident database, using the log ID. No notes, no follow-up. Whatever flagged the radar that night never made it into any formal report. I showed the playback to an old coworker who I still talk to now and then. He's one of the guys who taught me when I was new. He watched it twice, didn't say much, then asked where the return came from. I told him. He looked at me for a second, then said, "You sure that isn't just a reflection from a stray weather balloon or something?" I told him the system filters for those. He nodded, then closed the file and said, "Probably nothing." And that was that. I didn't push it. I've learned not to, especially with people who've been in that chair. You see enough strange things and you just start letting some of them slide off you. But here's the part that bugs me. After I found that log, I started going through the rest of the files. Out of maybe 100, I found 3 more with blips like that, always at exactly 70,000 feet, always skin paints, always no movement. And each time, the location was somewhere I'd lived or stayed for more than a few days. Once near my brother's cabin in Arkansas, once near a hotel I used to crash in when I worked doubles. Once over an old rental house we left in the 90s. They weren't all on the same day or even the same year, just scattered. But every one of them followed the same pattern. Brief return, exact altitude, no ID, no motion. I checked the radar logs from other stations, ones that overlapped our airspace, and didn't find anything. Whatever these returns were, they only ever showed up on the terminal radar in our sector. I haven't mentioned this to my family. I'm not sure what I'd even say. There's nothing to explain, and I don't have a theory. I still have the files. I don't know what to do with them, if anything. Most days I don't even think about it, but I haven't erased them either. I run almost every evening after work. Same loop through the edge of the neighborhood, down past the nature trail, and back along the golf course path. It's quiet, and by 7 or 8, there's hardly anyone out. I track everything on my smartwatch. Pace, heart rate GPS, even audio logs sometimes. It's just a habit now. Helps me unwind. That night wasn't any different. I left the house around 8:15, just after sunset. The sky was still pink around the edges, but fading fast. It had rained earlier, so everything smelled damp and fresh. The air was cooler than usual. I remember because I thought I might need a light jacket and decided against it. About a mile in, I cut off the sidewalk and onto the trail like usual. It winds behind some houses, then dips into a narrow wooded area, just a strip of trees between the subdivisions. I've taken it 100 times. I know where every bump in the path is. I had music playing through my earbuds, but not loud. I like to hear what's around me, just in case. Footsteps, bikes, dogs. It was mostly quiet. A few birds still going. One car passed on the road to the east, but that was it. I remember checking my watch right before I hit the half-mile mark on the trail. Everything was normal. Heart rate in the 130s. Pace a little slower than usual, but not by much. I kept moving. Then, it was like I blinked and was somewhere else on the path. Not far, maybe 20 feet ahead of where I thought I'd been, but it felt wrong. Like I'd skipped something. I was mid-stride, but I had no memory of taking the steps that got me there. I stopped. I actually stood still for a second and looked around. Same trail, same trees, but something felt quiet. Too quiet. The music had cut out, just static in the buds. I pulled one out and listened. Static. Faint, like a radio not quite tuned in. I looked at my watch. It said I was paused, not stopped. Paused. That only happens when I hold down the side button, which I hadn't done. I tapped to resume and checked the runtime. It showed 34 minutes and change. That didn't make sense. I should have only been 20 minutes in, tops. I opened the run history and saw the pause, 12 minutes, 17 seconds. Right in the middle of the route. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I stood there longer than I probably should have, trying to figure out if I'd zoned out or something. Maybe I took a break and forgot, but I wasn't out of breath. I wasn't tired. There was no place on that stretch to sit or lean unless I'd wandered into the brush. I looked down at the ground around me. It was damp and undisturbed, no footprints, no sign I'd stood there for 12 minutes. Nothing weird, just pine needles and gravel. I kept going, slower now. I felt uneasy, like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to be in. The trees seemed closer than they usually did. Taller, maybe, or just leaning more than I remembered. About a minute later, the static in my earbuds cut out. Total silence, like they'd died. But when I checked my phone, it still showed the music playing. I paused it and unpaused it. Nothing. I tried skipping tracks. Still nothing. I pulled both buds out and just listened. There were no bugs, no wind, no birds. It was dead quiet. That's when I realized I couldn't even hear the highway. And I'm always able to hear at least a hum from that direction. Even when the trees are thick, the sound carries. I felt watched. I know how that sounds, but that's exactly how it felt. Not like someone was behind me, more like something was very aware of me being there. I picked up the pace, no full sprint or anything, but enough that I felt like I was moving away from whatever that feeling was. When I finally came out the other end of the trail and hit the sidewalk again, the normal sounds came back all at once, like someone turned up the volume. Crickets, distant traffic, a plane overhead. I stopped right there under a streetlight and tried to replay what had just happened. I opened the audio recording on my phone. Don't always record, but for some reason I had that night. Probably something to do with testing a new app setting. It should have had the whole run. It was there. 44 minutes total. But from 22:03 to 34:20, it was nothing but static. Not silence, static. Low, glitchy hissing with occasional high-pitched pops. Like a broken speaker trying to process something it wasn't built to understand. I played it again. Same result. The GPS track on my app showed the same weird thing. A pause right in the middle of the woods. My little blue line just stops in place for over 12 minutes, then starts up again like nothing happened. I walked the rest of the way home, checking over my shoulder more times than I'd admit. I didn't feel right until I was back inside with the door locked. I backed up the audio file. I still have it. Every time I listen to it, I think maybe I'll hear something I missed. But it's just noise. Not even rhythmic, just broken sound. The watch never glitched like that again. I even used the same route. But I haven't taken that trail at night since. Not alone. I'd been running trail cams on that property for 5 years. It's about 60 acres of woods and rocky hills behind my cousin's place in central Pennsylvania. I hunt there during the fall, mostly whitetail, but I leave the cameras up year-round just to see what moves through. Coyotes, the occasional black bear, a lot of deer, nothing too weird. This happened in early October, 2 seasons ago. I had 3 cameras set up, one near a game trail that runs alongside a small creek, one up on the ridge near a salt lick I made, and one deeper in near this small clearing where I sometimes sit in the evenings. The cameras were the standard motion-triggered kind, with infrared for night shots. They're not high-end, but they get the job done. I hiked in after work on a Thursday to swap out SD cards. Everything looked normal. No sign of people, no trash, no tire tracks near the edge of the woods. I always check because one time a group of teenagers tried to throw a party back there and left beer cans everywhere. But that night, everything seemed undisturbed. I did the usual loop, ridge camera first, then the creek, then the clearing. Took me about an hour and a half. It was already getting dark by the time I finished. I didn't really notice anything strange until I got home and plugged in the cards. The ridge camera had nothing at all. No images, not even blank frames or low-res shadows like you'd get from wind-moving branches or a squirrel running by. It just had the timestamp file and then a single folder labeled IMG. When I opened that, it was empty. Same thing with the one by the creek. 0 photos. I thought maybe they were just malfunctioning. They'd both been out for a while and batteries die. But when I checked the clearing camera, things got weird. That one had photos, about a week's worth. Deer, mostly. One big buck I hadn't seen before, moving through right after midnight on the 3rd. Then a raccoon 2 nights later, and then nothing. No movement for 2 nights. Then one image taken at exactly 3:11 a.m., and that was it. The image wasn't clear. It was grainy and overexposed, like the sensor got flooded with too much light. You could still make out the trees, the pines in the background, some saplings in the foreground, but something bright was hovering between them, way in the back. It wasn't shaped like anything I recognized, not round like a flashlight, not sharp like car headlights, just kind of lopsided. And it had this weird texture to it, like mist around the edges, but the center was too bright to look at. No animal, no person, nothing in front of the lens, just that shape in the trees. After that, nothing. The next timestamp in the folder was 5 days later, like when I went to retrieve the card. I figured maybe there was a glitch. Overexposure from a lightning strike. Maybe. But the weather had been clear that whole week, and that particular camera had a brand new battery. I'd changed it myself when I set it out. It should have kept taking photos, motion or no motion. The next day, I went back out to the spot with a flashlight just to see if something was reflecting weird. The trees looked normal. No scorch marks, no broken branches, nothing trampled in the clearing. I even climbed up into the tree stand nearby and looked from above. Same view, same trees, no sign anyone or anything had been there. I left the camera running and put in a fresh card. This time I also brought one of those little battery-powered audio recorders and staked it to the base of a tree. I didn't expect anything, honestly. I thought maybe I'd just caught a fluke. A few nights later, I hiked in again. It was a Saturday, and I figured I'd just grab the card and head out. But about halfway in, I started getting this weird feeling. Not like I was being watched, exactly. More like everything had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel right. The kind of quiet where you realize you haven't heard a single bird or insect in a while. I kept going, but slower. My flashlight started acting up a little, flickering like the battery was loose. I tapped it and it went steady again, but as soon as I reached the clearing, it flickered out completely. I stood there for a second in the dark. I could still make out the tree silhouettes, and I knew the area well enough to move without tripping. I felt around and found the camera, still latched to the tree, and took out the SD card. Then I bent down to get the recorder. It was still there, but the little indicator light that shows it's recording wasn't on. I flipped the switch, nothing. I checked the battery, dead. It was a fresh battery when I left it, lithium, supposed to last 10 days. I headed back right after that, didn't hang around. The flashlight came back on about 5 minutes into the walk. At home, the SD card was completely blank, not a single file. Same with the audio recorder. Once I replaced the batteries, it powered on fine, but it didn't save anything. No static, no ambient sound, just blank. Over the next couple weeks, I tried a few more setups. Different cameras, even brought one of those cheap night vision binoculars and sat out there myself one evening. But nothing happened. No weird lights, no missing data. Everything worked normally again, like whatever it was had moved on. I still have the one photo. I printed it out and looked at it in different lights, tried scanning it, adjusting contrast, all that. The shape's still unrecognizable. It's just this hovering brightness tucked between the trees, slightly off center, like it wasn't meant to be seen directly. I haven't caught anything like it since. The cameras go off like normal, deer, foxes, the occasional owl, but I keep checking every season. Same clearing, same tree, always around 3 a.m. just in case. We were up near Donner Pass early October, me and my friend Tyler. We'd planned a 2-night backpacking trip, nothing too intense, just far enough from the highway that you could pretend civilization didn't exist for a while. It was a Thursday when we headed out, and there wasn't anyone else parked at the trailhead when we got there. That's part of why we picked it. The first day was normal. Cool weather, clear skies, good trail conditions. We hiked maybe 5 miles in before setting up camp near this little clearing just below a ridge. It wasn't an official site, but it was flat and dry, and there was a good spot to hang the bear bag, so we figured it was fine. That first night, we ate freeze-dried chili, talked for a bit, then turned in around 10. It got cold, colder than I expected. I kept waking up every hour or so just to shift around in my bag, trying to warm my feet back up. Tyler slept like a rock. At some point, maybe around 3 or 4 in the morning, I remember lying there, half awake, hearing this faint popping sound. Not like branches breaking, more like distant static or that weird crackling you get when a campfire is dying out. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I sat up for a minute, trying to figure out if it was something real or just in my head, but then it stopped. The next morning, we both got up around 7. It was cloudy, which was weird, because the forecast had been clear. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, but it never actually rained. We were packing up when Tyler noticed the footprints. He was standing maybe 15 feet from the tent by the edge of the called me over. There was a trail of boot prints in the dirt, clear, recent ones, coming in from the trees. They matched the tread on my boots, and the spacing and depth looked about right too. They led straight to our tent. But there weren't any going the other way. I figured maybe I'd wandered out at night to pee and just didn't remember. But I checked my pants and they were clean, no signs I'd stepped outside. Tyler said the same. He was sure he hadn't gotten up once. We followed the tracks back a little, into the trees. They just stopped about 30 feet in, like whoever it was had walked in a straight line from the forest edge to the tent, and then vanished. No broken branches, no scuffed dirt beyond that point. Just nothing. I don't know how to explain the feeling that gave me. It wasn't like we saw something obviously dangerous, but the idea that one of us or someone else had been walking around the tent at night without leaving, that messed with my head. Tyler got quiet after that. He's usually the one cracking jokes and talking constantly, but for the next couple hours, he barely said a word. I asked if he wanted to hike out early, but he said no. He wanted to finish the trip, maybe sleep at a different site the next night. So we hiked on. Another 4 miles deeper into the woods, up onto a higher ridge where there were more open views. The trail was tougher, more switchbacks, but we both felt better once we were moving. The second camp was smaller, surrounded by thick trees. No open clearing this time. We picked a spot just off the trail and got set up. I kept checking the ground near the tent, looking for tracks, but there weren't any. Just our own back and forth from the fire ring to the bags. That night, we made pasta and sat around talking about normal stuff again. Bands we liked in high school, weird teachers we remembered. It felt like the first night had just been some weird one-off. Maybe a trick of the light or an animal that left oddly shaped prints. I didn't know. I woke up again around 3 a.m. Same as before, half awake, cold, uncomfortable. But this time, there was something else. A low sound, not quite a hum, like a deep tone just barely at the edge of hearing. It came and went, kind of pulsing, almost like it was vibrating the air. I thought maybe it was wind pushing through the trees, but when I held my breath and listened, the branches weren't moving. It lasted maybe 10 or 15 seconds, then faded out. I turned to ask Tyler if he heard it, but he was out cold. I sat there in my sleeping bag, not moving for a long time, just listening. Nothing else happened. In the morning, the clouds were gone and the sky looked normal again. We packed up quietly and started the hike back. Neither of us brought up the sound or the footprints. We didn't have to. Back at the car, we both checked our boots again, just to be sure. Same tread as the prints we saw. But that only made it worse, because if it was one of us, we'd remember. And if it wasn't, there weren't any other vehicles at the trailhead when we got back. No hikers passed us on the way out, just us and the woods. It happened on a Tuesday night in late September 2 years ago. I was driving back from a job site in southern Illinois, about 3 hours from home. I usually stay overnight when I'm out that far, but I'd wrapped up earlier than expected and figured I'd just make the drive. I didn't want to waste the next morning packing up a motel room. I took the back roads like usual, mostly because I can't stand the interstate at night. Too many semis and blown out headlights. So I was on this stretch of 2-lane highway cutting through farmland, somewhere between Clay and Richland counties. Not much out there except fields, tree lines, and the occasional barn or silo way off in the distance. It was around 10:30 p.m. The sky was clear, no moon, just stars. I remember that because I'd been staring at them at a stop sign earlier, trying to keep myself awake. I wasn't tired exactly, just zoning out a little. It had been a long day. There was no traffic in either direction. I hadn't seen another car in probably 20 minutes. No houses nearby either. Just an old fence running along the left side of the road and open fields beyond that. I'd just passed a small gravel turnout where the tree line pulled back and left a wide patch of open grass. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a headlight through the trees, like maybe a tractor or ATV on the other side of the field. But it was too bright for that, and too high. It was a glowing ball, maybe the size of a beach ball, hard to say because of the distance, just hovering a couple feet above the ground. Pale white light, no blinking, no flicker. The edges were soft, like it was glowing from within instead of casting light around it. It rose slowly, not fast, just a steady upward motion, almost like it didn't care I was there. No sound. I rolled down the window to listen, thinking maybe it was a drone or something, but there was nothing. Just the wind and the faint hum of my engine. The sphere climbed until it was about level with the top of the utility poles that run alongside the road. Then it drifted toward the road itself, right over my lane, and stopped. I'd already slowed down by then. I don't even remember touching the brake. I just kind of coasted to a stop without thinking. It was maybe 30 feet in front of my car, suspended right above the center line. I had my high beams on, but they didn't seem to affect it. The light didn't glare or reflect. It just existed, like it wasn't part of the same space. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds, just watching it. It didn't move, didn't wobble or pulse, just hovered completely still. Then, without warning, it shot straight up. No arc, no buildup, no sound, just an instant vertical climb until it vanished from view. I craned my neck trying to follow it, but it disappeared so fast I couldn't track it. 1 second it was there, and the next, it was gone. That part really messed with me. I've seen fireworks, flares, even fast jets at air shows. Nothing moves like that. Nothing goes from a dead stop to straight up gone without any acceleration or noise. I sat there in the middle of the road for a while, long enough that my dome light timed out and the dash went dim. I kept looking out the window and up at the sky, half expecting it to come back, but it didn't. Eventually, I started driving again. The rest of the road was empty. I passed a few more fields and old barns, but nothing stood out. When I hit the next town, I pulled into a gas station and just sat in the parking lot for a while. I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't know what I'd even say. A few days later, I drove back out that way during the day, parked at the same turnout and walked out into the field a little, just to see if anything looked different. There was nothing. No burned grass, no broken branches, no signs that anything had been there. It was just a patch of scrubby grass and dry weeds. I still drive that road sometimes when I'm heading to a job downstate. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, but I never have. That was the only time. One sphere, one road, one silent exit straight up into the sky. It was the second week of July, and we were in the middle of one of those sticky heat waves that make everything feel heavier. We live about 10 minutes outside of town, not fully rural, but far enough that it's quiet at night and there aren't a lot of street lights. Trees on all sides. Our house backs up to a long field, and beyond that, there's just woods. That night, a storm rolled through. Not a big one, just a fast-moving line of thunderstorms. It knocked out the power around 9:30. No wind damage, no trees down, just the lights flickered and went out. We lit a couple candles and opened the windows to let air in. It was me, my husband Greg, and our daughter Natalie. She was 10 at the time. We were all downstairs in the living room, not really doing much, just sitting around talking, half listening to the rain. The house felt weird without the background hum of the fridge or the usual light from the TV. The storm passed pretty quickly. Maybe by 10:15, it was mostly just drizzle. I went out on the front porch with a flashlight to check the fuse box, even though I knew that wasn't the problem. Everything was fine. I stood there for a minute just watching the sky. It was low and overcast, but you could tell the clouds were starting to thin out in places. The moon was behind them somewhere, making everything look pale and flat. That's when I saw the light. It was behind the clouds, just a glow at first. I thought it might be heat lightning, except it was steady. It moved slowly, like it was drifting across the sky, but not like a plane. No blinking, no sound, just a whitish flicker that came and went like it was being partly blocked by the clouds. Then it stopped, just froze in place. I kept watching. The clouds shifted a little, and for a second I could see it better, like a soft, circular glow, not big, maybe the size of a quarter at arm's length, but bright enough that I could make out the edge of it through the haze. It looked too low to be a plane, too low and too slow. And again, no sound at all. I called Greg out to look. He came and stood next to me, squinting up. "There," I said, "right above those trees." He saw it too. I didn't say anything else. I wanted to see what he thought without me putting anything in his head. After about 10 seconds, he said, "Is it moving?" And it was. Not fast. It sort of floated sideways for a few seconds, then stopped again. Natalie came out behind us. I didn't want her to be scared, but she asked what we were looking at. Greg pointed and said, "There's a weird light up there. Might be a drone." But we both knew it wasn't a drone. Too high, too quiet, and it didn't move like one. We watched it shift again. This time it moved straight up, maybe 20 or 30 feet, then stopped dead again. Like a perfect 90-degree angle, then left. Another pause. Then it dropped diagonally, but fast this time, faster than anything else it had done, and stopped again. Natalie said, "Why is it doing that?" None of us answered. It kept repeating this pattern, smooth, perfect motions. Up, stop, left, stop, down, stop. Like it was scanning something, or watching. I went back inside to grab the old pair of binoculars we kept by the bookshelf. They weren't great, but I figured they'd help. When I brought them out, the light had shifted farther off to the west, toward the tree line behind our house. I tried to follow it through the lens, but it kept flickering. 1 second I could see it, the next it looked like it just vanished, then came back a few feet to the side. It wasn't pulsing exactly, more like it was going in and out behind something. Except the clouds weren't thick enough for that. There wasn't enough coverage to hide anything completely. It started to drift lower, slowly, then faster. It dropped until it was right over the treetops. The glow lit up the top branches faintly, just enough to make the shape of the trees visible. That's when we all kind of stepped back. None of us said anything, but it felt closer than it should have been. I remember thinking, just briefly, that it felt like it was looking back at us. That's not something I say lightly. I've lived here a long time. We've seen all kinds of things in the sky. Weather balloons, odd reflections, even weird planes flying low from the airbase a couple counties over. But this didn't match anything I'd ever seen. Not in how it moved, not in how quiet it was. The light hovered there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it shot straight up. Not like it flew up, like it was pulled. There was no buildup, no motion blur. 1 second it was over the trees, the next it was halfway up the sky, then gone. Just gone. No trail, no noise. The clouds stayed lit for another couple seconds, like the glow was still fading out. Then nothing. We stood there a while longer, just listening. The air was still. No crickets, no wind. Everything felt paused. Eventually, Natalie asked if we could go inside. We said yeah. The power came back on sometime around 1 in the morning. I know because I heard the fridge kick back on and the living room light we'd forgotten to switch off buzzed to life. The next day, we didn't talk much about it. I think we all figured we saw something strange, but we didn't know what to do with it. It's not like we could report it. What would we say? We checked the news. Nothing. No media reports, no power station issues, no mention of anything flying overhead. We haven't seen anything like it since, but on clear nights, I do find myself looking up more than I used to. I was out at Lake Hartwell that night, just a little ways off the dock behind my cousin's cabin. I've fished there plenty of times, usually with someone else, but that night it was just me. He and his wife had gone into town, and I didn't feel like tagging along. I wanted some quiet. It was early October, maybe mid-60s out. Pretty still, barely a breeze. I'd walked down the path to the water around 8:30 with a folding chair, my tackle box, and a flashlight strapped around my head. I had a thermos of coffee too, but I barely touched it. It was one of those nights that just felt kind of hollow. Not in a bad way, exactly, just really quiet. Even the insects weren't making much noise. I set up on the little gravel stretch to the right of the dock, cast out, and just waited. Didn't get anything, not even a nibble. I wasn't surprised. It was the wrong moon phase for catfish. I didn't care. It felt nice to be alone. I think it was around 9:45 when I noticed the water looked a little off. The moon was out, and there were just enough clouds moving across to make the surface change a bit, but this wasn't that. It looked more like the water was reflecting something faint, like a dull light moving under it. At first, I thought maybe it was someone else out in a boat, but I didn't hear any engine. I stood up and looked around. Nothing. No navigation lights, no oars slapping the water, no voices. Just that soft, pale light shifting under the surface about 20-30 feet out. It wasn't bright. It kind of shimmered like the way headlights look through fog, but lower, and it didn't ripple like a flashlight beam would. It was moving really slowly too. I stood there watching it for probably a full minute, waiting for it to break the surface or do something I could make sense of. Then 2 more lights appeared. They just sort of faded into view. One to the left of the first one, the other to the right, all about the same distance apart. They weren't in a straight line either. They formed a triangle, maybe 15 or 20 feet across, and they all hovered at the same depth. I couldn't see anything solid connecting them, but they stayed fixed in position, like they were attached to something. They didn't drift. That's what stuck with me the most. The water around them was moving a little, but the lights didn't shift or rock. They just stayed there, perfectly spaced, maybe 6 feet below the surface. I stared at them for a while, not moving, not sure if I was even seeing what I thought I was. My headlamp was off, and I didn't want to reach for it yet. I just watched. It wasn't like I felt scared exactly, but I didn't want to get closer either. It didn't feel right. After maybe 2 minutes, I finally flipped on the flashlight on my head. I aimed it right where the lights were. They vanished instantly. Not like they drifted off or dimmed, just gone the second the beam hit them. The water looked normal again. No glow, no distortion, no sound. I waited, shined the beam around the lake a little, trying to see if anyone else was out there messing around. Still nothing. It was dead quiet. I stood there for a long time after that, probably 10 or 15 minutes, just scanning the water. I didn't fish anymore. I didn't even pack up right away. I just stood still, listening. At some point, I turned my headlamp off again, thinking maybe the lights would come back if it was dark. I waited in the dark for a while, but they didn't. I remember checking my watch, and it was 10:12. That stuck in my head for some reason. Eventually, I packed up and walked back up the trail. The whole way, I felt like I was being watched. Not from the woods, but from the lake. Like something was still sitting under there, just below the surface. Back at the cabin, I didn't say anything. My cousin and his wife were still out. I sat on the porch for a bit, facing the lake, but I couldn't see anything from that far up. I kept thinking about how perfectly those lights had held their shape, not moving an inch. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking I heard little splashes from the water, even though the windows were closed. The next morning I went down there again in the daylight. The lake looked completely normal, nothing unusual about the spot where I'd seen them. I stood there for a long time just trying to figure out how something could glow like that underwater and not leave a trace. But there was nothing. No boats. No trash. Not even any fish. I haven't fished alone at that lake since. I woke up around 2 because of this humming sound. It wasn't loud, just steady. Sort of like an electrical box or maybe a phone vibrating against a table, but deeper. Almost like it was coming through the walls instead of from any one thing. I live in a small house outside of town, so usually it's quiet at night. No traffic, no neighbors close enough to hear anything from. I thought maybe it was the fridge at first or the HVAC fan cycling weird, but when I got up to check, it wasn't coming from inside the house. It sounded like it was coming from outside, somewhere low and wide and even, like it was surrounding the place, not moving, just there. I walked into the kitchen to look out the back window. Everything looked normal, just dark. The porch light was off, but the moon was out and I could see the edge of the tree line. No animals, no wind, nothing moving. The hum stayed steady. When I checked the stove clock to see what time it was, it said 2:08. I glanced over at the microwave, same thing. That was a little weird because I had reset them both just a couple days before when the power flickered during a storm, and they'd usually be a minute or two apart after a while. I went to check my phone next. It was on the kitchen counter charging, but the screen was frozen, like it had lit up, maybe from a notification or movement, but it was stuck on the lock screen. The time also said 2:08. I tapped it a few times, nothing. Pressed the power button, still nothing. It wouldn't respond at all. At that point, I was starting to feel a little off. It's hard to explain, but I felt kind of disconnected, like my body was moving slower than I meant it to. My limbs didn't feel heavy, just slightly delayed, like when you stand up too fast and get lightheaded. The humming hadn't changed at all. I decided to step outside, just onto the porch. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, but the second I turned it on, it flickered and died. Batteries had been fine last time I used it, just a couple nights earlier. The porch light wouldn't come on either. The hum was louder outside, but still not loud, just fuller, like the air itself was holding it. I stood there for maybe a minute. My chest felt weird, like it was harder to take a full breath, but I could still breathe. It reminded me of being in a plane before your ears pop, that dull pressure. My ears didn't pop, though. I thought maybe I should try starting my car. If nothing else, I wanted to see if the dash clock was working. When I opened the door, the dome light came on, but it was dim, like barely glowing. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. Nothing. No crank, no click, just silence. Then I noticed the dashboard. The clock display said 2:08, the same exact time. That was the point where I actually felt afraid. Up until then, I was confused and a little creeped out, but something about that, about 3 completely separate things, all showing the same frozen time, made my stomach drop. I looked back at the house and everything felt off. The windows were dark, but not in a natural way. More like they were covered in tinted film. I know how that sounds, but it's what I saw. The light wasn't reflecting right. Then the humming changed. It didn't get louder or quieter. It just shifted, like something tuning a radio dial a tiny bit. It dropped in tone, just slightly, and I could feel it in my teeth, like a vibration in my jawbone. Then everything went quiet. No hum, no bugs, no breeze, dead silent. I looked down at the clock on the dash. It blinked once. Just once. Then it ticked to 2:09. My phone lit up in my hand like normal, unlocked like nothing had happened. Kitchen lights were back on when I went in. The stove clock said 2:09. Microwave said the same. Both of them had ticked forward. I checked the flashlight again. It worked. Full beam. The fridge compressor kicked on like normal. I opened the back door and listened. Crickets were going again. Trees were moving just slightly in the breeze. The hum never came back. I stayed up the rest of the night, mostly just walking around the house and checking things. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I checked the car again. It started fine. Clock was accurate. Phone had no sign of malfunction. Battery was full, no error messages, nothing in the logs. Everything worked. But I know what I saw. All of it froze at exactly 2:08 and stayed like that for I don't know how long. It could have been seconds or longer. I didn't feel time passing the way I usually do. I never heard the hum again. I woke up around 4 a.m. like I usually do and glanced out the window of the little room above the barn. The ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses down on you after a long day of noise and work. But something was off. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was just the early hour messing with me. Down in the pasture, my cattle were all lined up, facing the same way. That's not unusual sometimes, but these weren't just milling around or grazing. They were standing still, heads up, staring dead ahead toward the far edge of the field. I'd never seen them do that all at once. I grabbed my coat and boots and stepped outside. The air was cold, dry. The sky was dark but clear, the stars sharp. I didn't hear any coyotes or anything else out here, just the low hum of the wind through the fences. I pulled the flashlight out of my pocket and walked toward the cattle. They didn't move, just kept staring like they were frozen or waiting for something. The ground around their feet was dry dirt, but what really caught my eye was a patch of earth maybe 30 feet across, right where they were all looking. It was scorched, like someone had dropped a huge flame right there overnight. There was no fire, no smoke, nothing burning, but the grass and weeds were blackened, crisp, and completely dead. I'm pretty familiar with the land and I was sure that patch wasn't there yesterday. I'd checked the whole pasture a few hours before dark. Nothing like that then. No scorch marks, no smell, nothing. The cattle still wouldn't move. I circled around to get a closer look at the scorched patch. It was a perfect circle, edges clean, not jagged or natural looking, almost like someone had traced it out with a big metal ring and burned inside it. I knelt down and felt the dirt, warm but not hot. That made me uneasy. I backed away and glanced up at the sky. No airplanes, no helicopters, no clouds, just stars. The moon was a thin sliver, so the field was mostly dark except where my flashlight hit the burnt circle. Suddenly, my dog barked somewhere behind me. I turned around but didn't see anything. The barking stopped almost immediately. I called for him, but he didn't come. That was weird, since he usually sticks close when I'm out here at night. I walked back to the barn to grab a better light and maybe the rifle, just in case. When I got there, my phone was dead. Not low battery, totally dead. I plugged it into the charger, but it didn't respond. Same with my truck. When I tried to start it, the dash lights flickered and went out. No power at all. I felt like I was cut off, but there was no cell signal anyway out here most nights. Still, I checked just to be sure. Nothing. I went back out with a bigger flashlight and sat on the tailgate of the truck. The cattle were still staring toward that circle like hypnotized or something. It was quiet, too quiet. I checked my watch. It was just after 4:15. Then I noticed the sound. A low hum, barely there, like a distant generator or transformer. But there was no power line anywhere near this part of the pasture. The hum was steady, kind of vibrating through the air and ground. I tried moving toward the circle again, but the cattle shifted slightly. Still facing it, but stepping closer together, like they were blocking the way. It was unnerving. I felt eyes on me too, but not from the cows. Somewhere just beyond the circle, in the dark brush line, I had the sense of being watched. I spun around, shining the light, but no movement, no shapes. My heart started to beat faster. I didn't want to stay out there, but I didn't want to leave the cattle like that either. So I sat in the truck and kept my light trained on the circle. The hum continued steady. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust or something burning but not on fire. After what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes, the circle started to change. The scorched earth seemed to shimmer, like heat rising on pavement in summer, but it wasn't heat haze. It was more like the surface was rippling, bending the light around it. The cattle all shifted again, stepping back, heads still locked on that spot. The hum grew louder, more intense, and I noticed the stars above dimming. Not gradually, just the patch of sky above the circle was darkening, like a shadow moving over the stars. I swallowed hard. The feeling of being watched came back, stronger, like something was just out of sight, waiting. Then, the circle of scorched earth started to glow. Not bright, more like a dull orange light that pulsed slowly, as if breathing. I blinked, and it was gone. The scorched earth looked normal again. The hum stopped. The stars twinkled back like nothing had happened. The cattle broke their stare and began moving, lowing softly, as if waking up from a long trance. I didn't stay to watch what came next. I got in my truck, which started fine this time, and drove home. On the way, I checked my phone. Still dead. I plugged it in again when I got home. And it powered up like nothing happened, showing a full battery and all notifications. I don't know what that patch of earth was or why the cattle acted like that. I just know what I saw, and it's been on my mind ever since. We were about an hour east of Barstow, middle of nowhere. Me and Greg had driven out to this dry lake bed we'd camped at a couple times before. No lights, no people, just miles of flat ground and scrub brush. It's the kind of place you go when you want real dark, like sky-swallowing dark. Greg's into astrophotography, and I mostly just like the quiet. We got there around 9:30, set up camp, cracked a couple beers. It wasn't cold, maybe low 60s, no wind, just that still desert air. We had a little Bluetooth speaker going, low enough that we could still hear the night, coyotes, the odd owl, normal stuff. Greg had his camera and tripod set up maybe 10 feet from the fire pit, pointed straight up. Around midnight, we were lying back in the truck bed watching satellites pass overhead. You get used to the way they move. Fast, smooth, predictable. Same with planes. They blink, they hum a little, they follow a line. We must have seen a dozen different ones that night. Then we saw something else. At first, it looked like another satellite. Same bright white point of light, same altitude. We didn't say anything right away, but then it slowed down. Just kind of eased to a stop in the middle of the sky. Greg sat up. You seeing that? Yeah. We both watched it for a second. It just hovered there. No blinking, no noise, no movement, just still. Then it started rotating. So, I don't even know how to describe that exactly. The light didn't spin like a beam or anything. The point of light stayed put. You could tell the shape behind it was turning. There were faint, darker shapes moving around it, like arms or fins or maybe just parts of whatever it was that caught the starlight at weird angles. It turned slow like a satellite dish repositioning. There was no sound. None. Greg adjusted his camera to try to get a long exposure, but every time he tried to take a photo, the camera would freeze up. He'd hit the shutter and the whole thing would lock. Not just the image, it physically wouldn't move. Screen dead, buttons dead. As soon as the lights started rotating, his gear stopped responding. He thought it was a battery issue and swapped it out, but same thing. Nothing. That's when I started feeling weird. Not scared exactly, just aware. Like when you realize you've been being watched for a while and didn't know it. I scanned the horizon, half expecting to see headlights or something, but the whole place was empty. Dead still. The light kept turning. Then it paused again, just froze. Then, this is the part I have trouble explaining, it darted left. Instant. No arc, no acceleration, just a sharp, flat move to the left, like dragging something across a screen. Stopped again, held, then moved up, same speed, same sharpness, and hovered. It did this a few more times, always in straight lines. No curve, no glide, like someone was clicking and dragging it. It never got closer or farther, just repositioned, maybe 50 miles up. It was impossible to tell how big it actually was. Greg muttered something under his breath, but I couldn't make it out. He looked pale, like he wanted to pack up and go. That's when all the crickets and night noise stopped. 1 second it was background noise. The next it was just gone. No wind, no rustle, not even the static from the speaker. It hadn't died. It was still lit up, just dead quiet. I remember standing up without meaning to. I just did, like something told me I needed to. My hands were sweating, mouth dry. I kept looking up, trying to process what the hell I was seeing. Then the light dropped. Not fell, dropped. Like a perfect downward motion, maybe a mile, then stopped again. And this time it stayed there. Not rotating, not moving, just hovering. We both backed toward the truck. We hadn't packed anything up. We just climbed in and shut the doors. Didn't drive. Just sat. Every few seconds, Greg would glance at it, then look away like it hurt to keep watching. After a minute, it started moving again, this time slower. It drifted north like it was following the horizon. Still no blinking, still no noise. It kept a dead straight path until it faded behind some distant hills. The sound came back all at once, like flipping on a stereo. Crickets, wind, even the low hum of the cooler's battery pack. Greg's camera powered back on like nothing happened. No battery drain, no glitch message. The photos he'd taken before were fine, but the ones from when the light was moving, all black. We didn't talk much after that. We stayed another hour or so, mostly in silence, then packed up and left before dawn. Driving back, I checked the GPS on my phone. The track showed a weird jag in our route near the lake bed, like we'd veered off road for a few hundred feet and then come back. But I know we didn't move the truck that whole time. We haven't been back to that spot since. I was out on one of those late afternoon walks, just me and my drone. I've been messing with drones for a few years now, mostly flying around the edges of the small forest near my place, taking shots of the treetops and the creek that cuts through the valley. It's relaxing, and honestly, it's nice to have something to focus on that's not work or the usual distractions. That day, the weather was clear, no wind to speak of. I set the drone up and let it fly higher than usual, just to get a better view. I was watching the live feed on my phone as it climbed, the little quadcopter getting smaller against the blue sky. Then, out of nowhere, the drone stopped dead in midair. Not a smooth hover like it usually does, but like someone hit an invisible wall right in front of it. I pulled the controls trying to steer it around, but it wouldn't respond. It just stayed there, motionless for maybe 2 seconds. The feed started to glitch, pixelating like a bad TV signal. Then it crashed. The drone dropped straight down, hitting the ground with a loud thud in a clearing a little ways off the trail. I hurried over, a bit annoyed, but mostly curious since it had never done anything like that before. When I picked it up and turned it on again, the camera feed saved the last few seconds before the crash. That's when I saw it. Right before impact, the camera caught something weird. A perfect sphere of light just floating there, completely still right where the drone had stopped. It wasn't moving or blinking like a drone's light or a plane, just a smooth, solid-looking orb of white light. It filled most of the frame, like it was maybe 4 or 5 feet across, just hovering. I rewound the clip over and over, trying to see if I'd missed something. The light was definitely there, no doubt about it. It didn't look natural, but it also didn't seem like any light source I knew. No flickering, no color changes, no shape shifts, just that perfect sphere. What got me was how the drone seemed to hit an invisible barrier, like it tried to fly through the sphere and was stopped by it. But when I looked for the sphere with my eyes after the crash, there was nothing. No light, no fog, nothing out of place in that clearing. Just trees, grass, and a broken drone. I tried to shake it off and packed up to head home, but that sphere kept playing in my mind. The next day, I went back to the spot. I searched all around, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Scorch marks, disturbed earth, footprints, something. Nothing. It was like the sphere had been a ghost or a trick of the camera. A few days later, I checked the footage again and noticed something else weird. When the drone was flying normally, the feed was smooth, but right before it hit the sphere, the audio cut out completely. No background noise, no wind, no chirping birds. Just silence, like the drone's microphone had been turned off. I tried flying the drone in the same area again, but nothing happened. No invisible walls, no spheres of light, just normal flights. Still, I can't explain what I saw that day. It wasn't a bird or a balloon. It was too perfect, too deliberate. Sometimes I think about how the drone just stopped like that, as if something didn't want it to go any further. I never felt like I was in danger, but that moment made me uneasy. Like whatever it was watching and controlling things in a way I couldn't see. I keep the drone stored away now, only take it out when I feel ready to deal with whatever else might be out there. The footage is saved on my hard drive. I watch it sometimes, trying to figure it out, but the sphere stays a mystery, just a perfect silent ball of light that blocked my drone's path and vanished without a trace. I woke up to the dull hum of the engine and the faint glow of streetlights outside the window. My head was pounding and the seatbelt felt tight across my chest. I blinked a few times trying to clear the fog in my brain and realized I was sitting in my car. But the weird part? I had no idea how I got there. I looked around and the car was parked perfectly beside a quiet stretch of road, far from any city lights or houses. The dashboard clock read 2:18 a.m. I had been driving earlier, sure, but I had zero memory of pulling over or stopping. The engine was still running, the radio off. I checked the gear shift. Parked. Doors locked. I tried to remember what had happened before this, but my mind was blank. No memory of stopping the car or why I'd pulled off. The last thing I recalled was being on the highway, listening to a podcast, and then nothing. The road outside was empty. No other cars or people around. I reached for my phone but saw it was dead. I must have left it off or forgotten to charge it. No help there. I stepped out of the car and stretched, trying to shake off the weird grogginess. The air was cool and smelled like wet asphalt and pine. I looked down the road both ways. Nothing. Just dark trees lining the highway, no houses, no signs of civilization. I felt uneasy, but figured maybe I'd pulled over to rest and blanked it out. I'd done it before when I was tired on long drives, but that didn't explain why the car was still running or why I couldn't remember doing it. I got back in, locked the doors, and tried to start the engine to continue driving. It started fine. As I pulled back onto the road, I noticed something strange in my side mirror. A blinking white light hanging low above the treetops on the right side of the road. It wasn't a car, it was too high and didn't move like one. It blinked on and off steadily like a beacon or a warning light. I slowed down to watch it, but every time I glanced in the mirror, the light was there, just beyond the edge of the road. When I looked ahead again, the road was empty. I told myself it was probably a reflection or some kind of marker light, but the steady blinking didn't feel normal. I slowed even more, trying to get a better look. The light stayed at the same height, never moving closer or farther away. After a few minutes, I stopped to take a photo with my phone, hoping to capture whatever it was. But when I looked at the screen, the photo was completely black. I tried again. Same result. That made my skin crawl a little. Something about the light felt wrong. It was quiet, no sound at all. Not like an airplane or a helicopter, which I'd expect to hear. Just that blinking, steady light. I started driving again, trying to leave the area, but the blinking light stayed with me, always just behind the trees on the right side. After about 10 minutes, it vanished suddenly. 1 second it was there, the next gone. I checked my rearview mirror and the side mirrors carefully. No other cars, no other lights. A few minutes later, I felt a strange pressure in my head, like a low-frequency vibration I couldn't place. It wasn't painful, but it made me dizzy and foggy. I pulled over again, this time fully stopped and turned off the engine. The car was silent except for the faint sound of the wind outside. I sat there, trying to clear my head, and noticed something else. The radio, which I'd left off, was now on low volume, playing static. I didn't touch it. The volume was low, almost like it was turning itself on slowly. I reached to switch it off, but it cut out on its own right before my hand touched the dial. That freaked me out more than the blinking light. The car felt less like mine and more like a strange place I was trapped in. I tried to call someone on my phone again, but it still wouldn't turn on. I took a deep breath and decided to just get back on the road and head home. As I drove back, I noticed the stars above were oddly bright and seemed to shift slightly when I looked away and looked back, like they were moving in patterns I couldn't follow. I blinked hard and they looked normal again, but the feeling that something was off stuck with me. When I finally got home, I checked my watch and realized that nearly an hour had passed, but I couldn't place what happened during some of that time. There were gaps in my memory I just couldn't fill. I checked the mileage on the car. It showed I'd driven farther than I remembered, but the road felt unfamiliar, like I'd taken a different route without realizing it. I still don't know what exactly happened that night. The blinking light, the missing memories, the radio turning on by itself, all of it felt like something was there, just beyond what I could see or understand. I keep replaying it in my mind, trying to make sense of it, but it doesn't add up, and maybe it never will. I was fiddling with my old ham radio late one night, just like I usually do when I can't sleep. It's a habit more than anything. A way to pass time, listen to the usual crackles and static, maybe catch a random conversation. I'm not some big shot operator or anything, just a guy with a handheld setup and a cheap antenna, sitting in my living room while the city outside sleeps. That night, around midnight, I was scanning through the dead zones, the parts of the dial where normally nothing happens. You know, the static and silence that make you think maybe the radio's broken. That's when I caught something weird. It wasn't a voice or a song, not really anything like the usual chatter. It was this repeating pattern of sounds, almost like Morse code, but not quite. I adjusted the squelch, tweaked the volume, and kept listening. The pattern repeated every 30 seconds or so. It wasn't dots and dashes the way I know them. It was more mechanical, precise, like a machine trying to talk but not quite speaking our language. The sounds were short bursts, clicks or pulses, but arranged in a way that suggested meaning, or at least intention. I tried recording it on my phone, but the quality wasn't great. Still, I played it back, trying to decode anything familiar. Nothing added up. The sequence repeated endlessly, never speeding up or slowing down like a loop. I ran it through a Morse translator app just for kicks, and it spit out nonsense. Random letters, no words. Over the next hour, I kept hearing it, always the same pattern. I even tried tuning other nearby frequencies, thinking maybe it was interference or a prank, but no. This thing was locked in on that dead channel, crystal clear, cutting through the static like it belonged there. At some point, I noticed something else. The usual background hum of my radio equipment, the low electrical buzz, started to fade, as if the device itself was quieting down to let the signal through. That was strange because my radio is old and noisy. It felt like the signal was overpowering the normal sounds. I remember feeling this creeping chill, like I was listening to something I wasn't meant to. I got up to grab a flashlight and check the antenna on the balcony, just to make sure nothing was loose or interfering. When I looked back inside, the radio had completely cut off the static. The only sound was the pattern itself, pure and steady, no background noise. I sat back down, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Then I noticed the clock on the wall. It was off by 6 minutes. I was sure I'd been listening for an hour, but somehow 6 minutes had disappeared. I checked my phone's timestamp on the recording and saw the same thing. The audio skipped exactly 6 minutes in the middle of the pattern. No breaks, no glitches, just a sudden jump. I went outside to get some fresh air. The street was empty and quiet, nothing out of the ordinary except that the streetlights flickered for a second. The whole block dimmed, then came back on. I thought maybe it was a power surge, but nothing was reported on the news later. When I went back inside, the pattern was still playing, unchanged. But then out of nowhere, it stopped, just cut out like someone hit mute. The radio went back to static, like nothing had happened. I tried to get the pattern back, but it never came. I kept scanning that dead frequency every night for a week, but it was silent. The antenna was fine. My gear worked as usual. I don't know what I heard that night. The pattern, the silence that followed, the missing minutes. It didn't make sense. It felt like I was tuning into something that was there and then vanished. I can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to. But that signal is still stuck in my head like a ghost frequency that only I ever heard. We were driving back home from visiting some friends, late on a Saturday night. It was just me and Sarah in the car. No music playing, mostly quiet except for the hum of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. The highway was empty, not a single other car for miles. We'd taken this route 100 times before, so nothing about it was new. About 20 minutes in, Sarah glanced over at me and said, "Hey, do you see that light back there?" She pointed out the window but didn't say much else. I looked in the rearview mirror but didn't see anything at first. Then I caught it. A small blinking light, maybe like a drone or a distant airplane, but weirdly low and close. It was on the left side of the highway, following us at the same speed. It blinked once every few seconds, steady, rhythmic. Not flashing like a police car or emergency vehicle, but just one light going on and off. I checked the side mirrors and rear view again, but the light wasn't there. Like, it was visible only from the driver's side window, but nowhere else. I told Sarah, and she said she saw the same thing. At first, I figured it was just a trick of the light, some reflection from a road sign or a distant radio tower, but it didn't feel right. The light stayed about the same distance behind us, moving at our pace. Every time I glanced over, it blinked. I pulled the dash cam out of the glove box, something I'd barely used before. I turned it on and pointed it out the windshield. We kept driving, and the light stayed with us, never changing distance or speed. I asked Sarah if she wanted me to speed up or slow down to see if the light changed. She nodded, a little nervous but curious. I let off the gas and slowed by about 10 miles per hour. The light kept pace. I sped up a little. The light did too. Always steady, always blinking in that slow rhythm. We passed a few road signs, nothing else around. The highway was completely dark except for the dim glow of our headlights and the occasional blinking light behind us. I kept glancing in every mirror, but never once did the light show up. It was like it was always off to the side, just out of any reflective view. About 20 minutes passed like this. The light didn't blink faster or slower, didn't change color or shape, just a single white dot blinking steadily. I pulled over at a rest stop to check the dashcam footage. The video was grainy, but the blinking light was definitely there, about where I remembered it being. The light hovered behind us at about the height of a car's roof, maybe a bit higher. It wasn't moving erratically like a drone. It just followed. I looked at Sarah, who was quiet. I could tell she was unsettled, but didn't want to say anything. I tried to joke about it, maybe it was some weird new tech or a prank, but it didn't feel funny. Back on the road, the light stayed with us for another 15 minutes. Then, out of nowhere, it disappeared. No blink, no glow, just gone. I looked everywhere, mirrors, windows, even out the windshield. Nothing. We kept driving, no other lights followed us after that. The whole trip home felt different, like the night wasn't normal anymore. When I watched the dash cam again the next day, the light was still there in the footage, but I couldn't explain what it was or why it never appeared in the mirrors. I told a couple of friends, but they laughed it off, said maybe it was a trick of perspective or something on the windshield. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. The thing is, it wasn't some glitch or reflection on the camera either. The light's blinking is too consistent, and the footage shows it clearly moving with us. I haven't seen anything like it before or since. Just that one night, that one blinking light, following us silently, but never showing up where it should have if it was a normal object. I was hiking alone one night, out in the mountains, where the sky is supposed to be really clear. I'd picked a trail I hadn't tried before, just to get some distance from the usual weekend crowds. It was around midnight when I stopped at a little clearing to catch my breath, looking up. The stars were bright, way more than I was used to seeing from the city. I leaned back against a tree and just stared up at the sky for a while. I'm no astronomer or anything, but I'd always liked watching the constellations, Orion, the Big Dipper, that kind of stuff. That night, the sky felt weird, but not in a dramatic way, just off, like something was subtly wrong. At first, I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. The stars above me, the whole sky, seemed to shift a little bit. Not like moving fast or anything, but like the whole pattern was sliding sideways very slowly. It wasn't like the Earth turning. I know enough about that. It felt like the stars themselves were shifting. I blinked, expecting the effect to stop, or at least change, but when I opened my eyes again, the stars had snapped right back into their usual spots. I rubbed my eyes and looked up again, and the same slow shift started. It was subtle, but definitely there. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, blinking a bunch and watching. Every time I blinked, the stars realigned perfectly. Every time I opened my eyes, they'd start drifting out of place again, slowly sliding to the side like the sky was warped or bent just for me. It felt like the world itself was breathing, only it wasn't the air or the trees, it was the stars. And somehow I was the only one who could see it. I started to feel kind of uneasy. The forest was silent except for some distant rustling, probably animals moving around. I kept looking around, half expecting to see someone watching me or something strange in the shadows, but nothing was there. I checked my phone for the time. Battery was low, but it showed 12:15. I tried to call my buddy who was supposed to meet me at the trailhead in a couple hours, but the signal was gone. That wasn't unusual out here, but it added to the weirdness. I packed up my stuff slowly, eyes still flicking back to the sky. The slow star shift happened a few more times as I got moving, always disappearing when I blinked, always creeping back when I looked. As I walked back down the trail, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I'd stop and listen, but no footsteps or voices, just the trees and the night. Every time I looked over my shoulder, the shadows seemed to flicker oddly, like they weren't quite right. The stars kept drifting and snapping back as I hurried down, and I found myself blinking more than usual, almost unwillingly. I couldn't tell if it was just fatigue or if something was messing with my vision. After about an hour, I reached a spot where the trees thinned out and I could see the lights of a town far below. That was normal, comforting. The stars seemed to stop shifting once I was closer to the lights, or maybe I just stopped noticing it. I wasn't sure. When I got back to my car, the normal night sounds of the highway and distant cars felt loud. I checked the sky one last time before I got in. The stars were where they were supposed to be. I drove home feeling off, like I'd seen something I shouldn't have, but I couldn't say what. I've looked up at the stars a lot since then, but never saw anything like that again. Sometimes, when I'm alone outside at night, I think I catch a glimpse of that slow shift again, but I'm not sure if it's real or just my mind playing tricks. It started late on a Thursday night. I was sitting on my front porch, smoking a cigarette, trying to wind down after a long day. It was quiet, one of those nights where everything feels still, like the whole neighborhood is holding its breath. I just finished telling my girlfriend goodnight when I noticed something odd up above the houses at the end of our cul-de-sac. There was this huge, dark shape hovering there, just above the tree line. At first, I thought it was a drone or maybe some kind of low-flying helicopter, but it made no sound. None. Not even the faintest hum. It was bigger than any drone I'd ever seen, more like the size of a small plane, maybe bigger. The shape was kind of oval, smooth edges, but no lights or markings. It didn't move, just hung there silently. The street lights lit up the bottom of it, so I could see the outline pretty clearly. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was imagining things, or maybe it was just a weird trick of the light. But it didn't go away. I even went inside to get my phone to take a picture, but the moment I stepped off the porch, it vanished. Just like that. No warning, no fading out. It was gone. I wasn't the only one who saw it that night either. The next morning, I was talking to a couple of neighbors, Karen from across the street, Mike down the road, and they said they'd seen the same thing. Karen said she was walking her dog and looked up to see it just hovering there, motionless and silent. Mike was out in his backyard grilling and noticed it too. We all agreed on the size and the shape. But the weird part is none of us heard a thing. No engines, no wind disturbance, nothing. And nobody could explain why it just disappeared when I went inside. The strangest thing is, I checked online and called the local airport. There were no flight logs or reports of any aircraft in the area at that time. No helicopters, no planes, no drones. The FAA said nothing unusual had been reported. The police said no calls had come in about anything strange. After a couple of days, a few more neighbors started mentioning that they saw it too. Some even said they felt this odd pressure in the air, like when a storm's about to roll in, but without the weather changing. Others said their pets were acting weird, nervous, restless. My cat stayed under the bed for 2 days straight. I started feeling a little paranoid, watching the sky whenever I was outside, especially at night. Sometimes I'd see small flickers of light way off in the distance, but they never got close, and they never made any noise. They felt detached, like someone or something was watching but didn't want to be noticed. One night, about a week after the first sighting, I was up late again, pacing the porch. It was colder than usual, the air damp and still. Then, out of nowhere, my streetlight flickered off and back on a few times. I looked up, hoping it was just a power glitch, but then I noticed a faint glow coming from behind the houses at the end of the cul-de-sac. The glow wasn't like a flashlight or a car's headlights. It was soft, pale, like someone had placed a lantern just behind the trees. It pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. I stood there watching for a few minutes. The glow shifted a little, moving behind the trees but never fully showing itself. Then the streetlight blinked off again, and when it came back, the glow was gone. That's when I started to feel real uneasy. I kept looking for a logical explanation, maybe a reflection from a neighbor's porch light or a distant car's headlights, but nothing added up. A couple of nights later, I was inside watching TV when I heard this low vibration. It wasn't loud, but it was there, underneath the normal sounds of the house, like something humming in the distance. I walked outside to check and saw nothing unusual, but that hum stayed with me for hours. The next morning, I found that some of the neighbors had left notes on doors asking if anyone else had heard it or seen anything weird. Most said yes. The hum, the light, the big shape hovering, it had all become a shared experience, but no one could explain it. One of the neighbors, an older guy named Jim, told me he'd seen similar things years ago, but back then, nobody talked about it. You just kept it to yourself. Now, with phones and cameras everywhere, it felt different, but oddly, nobody had any real evidence. No photos, no videos, just a bunch of stories. I tried to take pictures myself, but every time I pulled out my phone and aimed at the sky, the screen would freeze or go black. It was like something was interfering with the camera, or maybe my phone just wouldn't cooperate when I needed it most. It's been a few weeks now since the first sighting, and the big shape hasn't come back. The strange glow and the humming happen less often, but the feeling that something's off never really left. I'm not sure what I saw or experienced. I can't say it was anything specific or explain what that big silent thing was. But something was there, something that didn't fit any normal pattern. The whole neighborhood talks about it now, but there's no record, no official explanation, and definitely no answers. Just a bunch of people who saw the same strange thing and don't quite know what to make of it. I was out on a weekend hike by myself, nothing fancy, just the usual trail I like to take near the ridge. It's quiet there, not many people go that far, especially this time of year. I'd started in the late afternoon and was making my way up the switchbacks as the sun was dipping lower. The air was cool and still, almost too still for late spring. About halfway up, I stopped for a break near a small clearing. That's when I saw them, dozens of birds, just lying there in the dirt. Not scattered around either. They were arranged in this perfect circle, like someone had placed them there on purpose. I'm not exaggerating, the circle was almost flawless, maybe 15 feet across. All kinds of birds too, nothing specific. Sparrows, finches, maybe a couple of crows, all just dead. I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of it. No blood, no broken wings, no signs they'd been attacked, just quiet. And the weirdest part was this fine gray dust covering their feathers. It looked like ash or maybe pollen, but it wasn't blowing around or coming from any nearby tree. It just coated them evenly, like a powder. I reached out with my glove, touched one carefully. It felt dry, almost chalky. I looked all around, thinking maybe there'd be something explaining it. A nest nearby, a predator's lair, a trap. Nothing. No footprints except mine. No disturbed plants or branches, no smell of decay or fire. My heart started to speed up, but I kept telling myself to stay calm. Maybe it was some kind of weird disease outbreak or environmental thing. Still, I've hiked a lot and never seen anything like this. I took out my phone to take pictures, but the battery was low and the signal was spotty up there. The photos came out oddly too, like the dust reflected the light strangely. In some shots, the circle looked almost brighter than it did to the naked eye. I didn't want to stay too long. The sun was slipping fast and the forest was getting darker, but something about that scene kept pulling my eyes back to the circle. I took a few steps back, then turned around. That's when I noticed the silence. Not just quiet, but this thick, heavy silence. No birds singing, no rustling leaves, nothing. Usually even late in the day you'd hear something. Bugs, animals, the wind through the trees. But there was just this eerie stillness, like the forest had stopped breathing. As I headed back down the trail, I kept glancing over my shoulder. It felt like I was being watched. But every time I looked, nothing was there. No movement, no eyes shining in the underbrush, just me and the darkening woods. When I got back to my car, I checked the photos again. One of them showed a faint, almost circular blur above the birds, like a shadow or a haze, but I couldn't tell what it was. I tried zooming in, adjusting the contrast, but it didn't clear up. I told a few friends about it later, but they just shrugged it off. Said maybe I'd stumbled on a weird natural event or some prank. I don't know. I keep going over it in my head, trying to explain what I saw and felt. The circle, the dust, that silence. It doesn't make sense. I went back a week later, but the circle was gone. Just normal forest floor. No sign anything had happened there. It's like it was never real. I'm not sure what I stumbled on that day, and I don't know if I want to find out. but it's been on my mind since. I was flying a routine training run out over the desert, just me and my co-pilot in the cockpit. We'd taken off around dusk with clear skies and a smooth ride. Nothing unusual, just the usual checklists and radio chatter. The kind of flight you do 100 times and expect to be boring. About halfway through the trip, I noticed these lights off in the distance, way out near the horizon. At first, I thought it was some other plane or maybe a group of helicopters flying formation. But the desert out there doesn't see much traffic after dark, and the way those lights move didn't fit anything normal. I pointed them out to my co-pilot. "You see that?" I asked. He looked where I was pointing and shrugged. The lights were small but distinct, like 5 or 6 dots in a line, spread out evenly, moving steadily. What caught my attention was how perfectly they kept pace with us. As we climbed, the lights climbed. When we accelerated, they matched speed exactly, keeping the same distance, maybe 3 or 4 miles behind us. It was strange enough that I pulled up the binoculars to get a better look. The formation held steady, silent out there in the darkening sky. No blinking navigation lights, no flashing strobes, just solid, constant points of light. Nothing about them looked like anything I'd ever seen on a radar or any training manual. I mentioned it on the radio just to see if anyone else picked it up, but no one answered. No warnings, no chatter about traffic, just silence. After a while, the lights seemed almost hypnotic. They didn't change formation or direction, just followed. It was like they were glued to us, no matter what maneuvers we tried. I felt a weird tension building, like I was being watched but couldn't look away. Then my co-pilot pulled out his own binoculars and scanned the spot where the lights were. He stared for a good 30 seconds, then shook his head. "I don't see anything," he said flatly. I blinked, confused. The lights were still there for me, steady and clear. I looked again, this time with my naked eye. The lights had vanished, just gone, as if they'd never been there. I asked him to look again, but he just stared into the empty sky. No glow, no points of light, nothing. I felt a cold rush. How could I be seeing something he couldn't? We kept circling, looking back to where they'd been, but there was nothing. No other aircraft on the radar, no sound, no evidence. Later, during the debrief, I tried to describe it, but it sounded crazy even to me. My co-pilot didn't mention anything. I wondered if he had just been tired or had some kind of lapse. But I kept thinking about those lights, how they followed us so precisely, then disappeared the moment he looked. I still can't explain what it was. It wasn't a glitch, not a trick of the eye, at least not for me. Something out there matched us perfectly, then just vanished when it was noticed. I flew other missions after that, but I never saw anything like it again. I woke up because the air felt different, too cold for this time of year, and there was this faint hum in the background. I thought maybe it was just the wind, but then I noticed these beams of light moving over the tops of the trees outside my tent. They were bright white, like searchlights, but there was no source I could see. No cars, no helicopters, no flashlights. Just these slow, steady beams sliding silently across the forest. At first, I thought maybe someone was out here, like a ranger or another camper trying to find something. I grabbed my phone to check the time. Just after 2 a.m., I figured I'd go see if someone needed help or something was wrong, but the moment I unzipped the tent and poked my head out, the beams stopped, just vanished like someone flipped a switch. The forest was dead quiet, except for the usual night sounds, an owl hooting somewhere, leaves rustling in the breeze, but something didn't feel right. I stayed still and listened, trying to figure out where those lights could have come from. The sky was clear, stars shining, no moon, so it wasn't a reflection or anything like that. I went back inside the tent and lay down, but my heart was pounding. I kept hearing this low hum, almost like electricity buzzing, but it wasn't steady. It'd come and go. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps nearby, soft and slow, but when I shone my flashlight outside, nothing was there. No animals, no people. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. After maybe 10 minutes, the lights came back, but this time they were different. Instead of sweeping over the trees, they moved in sharp, deliberate patterns like they were scanning specific spots. The beams crisscrossed, paused, and moved again. It was so silent I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I started feeling watched, not just by whatever was making the lights, but like someone or something was standing just beyond the tree line, watching me watch them. I pulled the tent zipper up and sat against the wall, flashlight in hand, trying to calm down. My phone had no signal, no messages. I tried calling out, but my voice just disappeared into the night. The beam stopped again, but the hum stayed, low and steady this time. I checked my watch. An hour had passed since I first saw the lights, but it felt like minutes. Time was weird out here. At one point, I felt the tent shake like a gentle tap on the fabric. I froze. Then, just a faint rustling in the leaves right outside. I waited a few more minutes, then slowly unzipped the tent again. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches. The beams were gone for good and the hum had faded. I packed up quietly before dawn and left. I didn't see anyone else on the way out. Just me, the empty forest, and the feeling that whatever was out there wasn't done watching. It started around 2:40 in the morning. I wasn't asleep yet because I'd stayed up watching TV in the living room. The volume was low, lights off, just the glow of the screen and my dog snoring next to me on the couch. The kind of dead quiet late night stretch where the whole neighborhood feels like it's holding its breath. I heard the first click from the motion light on the side of my house, just outside the living room window. It makes this soft plastic pop when it turns on, and the light it throws into the yard is this cold blue-white that always makes everything look kind of off, like a fake version of my yard. I looked toward the window and figured it was probably a raccoon or one of the neighbor's cats. It happens sometimes. I didn't get up. Maybe 10 seconds later, I saw the light from my porch floodlights spill across the driveway. That one's not motion triggered. It's got a manual switch. But the motion sensor on the garage kicked on right after, lighting up the side of my car. Then the neighbor's yard lit up. Then the house across the street. One after another, every single motion light on the block turned on, like a wave going down the street. It wasn't all at once. There was maybe a second between each one, like something was moving past each house in turn. I couldn't see anything, though. Nothing out the windows, no movement, no shadows. Just empty front lawns glowing under those harsh fake lights. My dog lifted his head and let out this low grumble. Not a bark, just that uneasy little growl he does when someone walks too close to the house. I muted the TV and just sat there listening. I live in a cul-de-sac, so it's not like there's through traffic or anything, just the same 10 houses. Most of them have ring cameras or some kind of security setup. I've got one too, pointing at the driveway, and I usually check the footage in the morning if something weird happens. But in the moment, I didn't want to move. I just kept looking out at the street, trying to see anything at all that would explain why every motion light had turned on. No cars, no wind. The trees weren't moving. It was totally still. Then the lights started turning off. Same order. Mine was first, then the garage, then the neighbors, then across the street. One by one, like something had gone down the block, and now it was coming back. I sat perfectly still. My dog got up, went to the window, and stared out, tail down, not making a sound. When the last light clicked off, it felt darker than before. I don't know how to explain it. The streetlights were still on, but they looked dim or farther away, like everything had shifted half a step to the left. I finally got up and looked out the front door. I didn't open it, just peeked through the peephole. Nobody was out there. The whole street was dead silent. I went back to the couch, but I didn't sit down. I stood there in the dark, not sure if I should wake anyone up. I live alone, but my brother was staying with me for a few days, sleeping in the guest room at the back of the house. I didn't want to scare him if this was nothing. I grabbed my phone instead and pulled up the app for my security cam. It had motion events logged, all spaced about 5 seconds apart, right in line with when the lights went on. I tapped the first one and watched the footage. Nothing. Just the car, the yard, the still bushes. No movement at all. I scrubbed through the whole clip. It lasted about 10 seconds. Just the garage light flicking on and staying on. No bugs flying by. No branches swaying. Not even a breeze. I checked the next one. Same thing. Light comes on, total stillness, then clicks off. I opened the camera feed live and looked through it while I stood at the window. It matched perfectly. Nothing moving, nothing strange, just the empty driveway. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed in the living room with the lights off and the camera app open. My dog sat by the door the whole time, ears up, staring at nothing. The next morning, I asked my neighbor, Ed, retired guy, nice enough, if his camera caught anything weird. He said he got a bunch of alerts, but when he checked, the videos were all blank. That night, I kept my porch light on. Left the blinds open too. Nothing happened. But the night after that, right around the same time, the lights did it again. Same order. Same slow chain reaction down the block. This time I recorded it with my phone from inside, just the window view. You can see the lights clicking on one after another. But when I checked the driveway footage again, nothing. No shadows. No raccoons. No bugs. Just empty yards lighting up for no reason. It happened 3 more times that week. Always around 2:40 to 2:50 a.m., always in the same order, then back again. Then it stopped. Never happened again. But every once in a while, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think I saw a flash through the window, like one of those lights came on again. When I check, there's nothing. Just the dark, and my dog staring at the front door. I was out near the Mojave, a few miles north of Joshua Tree, trying to get some long exposures of the night sky. It was late, past midnight, and I was by myself. I've done solo desert trips for years, nothing new about that. I like the quiet, the isolation. Bring enough water, know your bearings, and it's fine. The sky's usually perfect out there, no light pollution, no noise. I had parked off a dirt road that cuts around some low hills, maybe an hour off the main highway. I set up on a flat stretch facing east, not too far from where the land dips into a shallow wash. Tripod, wide lens, 10-second shutter, usual stuff. It was dead still. No wind, not even bugs, just dry air and quiet. I was shooting in intervals, snap a few, check them, adjust. I'd been out there maybe 30-40 minutes when I noticed something weird with one of the photos. Everything looked normal, except there was this bright dot in the upper left corner that hadn't been there in the others. Thought maybe it was a plane at first, or a planet that had finally cleared the horizon. But when I looked up, I didn't see anything. I took another shot. It was there again, in a slightly different spot, but not trailing like a plane would. Just a pinprick, brighter than anything else in the sky, but sharp, too sharp. Not twinkling, just steady. I figured maybe it was a satellite, so I waited a few seconds, expecting it to drift like they do. It didn't. It just stayed put. That's when I noticed it was slowly getting bigger. Not like it was glowing or pulsing, just physically getting larger. Still round, still perfectly white, but bigger than before. I kept watching, trying to convince myself it was just an illusion, maybe rising through some kind of thin cloud layer, but there weren't any clouds. The sky was clear. I took another photo. When the exposure ended and the image popped up on the screen, the light was dead center, right above me. But I couldn't see it when I looked up. I stepped back from the camera and stared at the sky. Nothing. Stars. Darkness. I waited. Then, there it was again. Faint at first, off to the east where I'd originally seen it. It wasn't glowing or flashing, it was just there. And it was moving, not drifting, moving. Smooth, steady, not fast, but straight. Toward me. I could tell because the angle wasn't changing. Every few seconds it looked a little larger. Still dead silent, no wind, no bugs, no ambient sound at all. Just dry air and that tiny dot coming closer. I got a weird feeling in my chest. Not panic exactly, just this sense of being completely exposed. Like I just noticed how far from anything I really was. The truck was maybe 60 yards behind me. I could see the edge of its shape in the moonlight, but it felt way further than that. I packed the camera fast, not panicking, just deliberately fast. I didn't want to turn my back on the sky, so I kept glancing up between motions. Every time the light looked a little bigger. Still no sound, no blinking, no trail. By the time I had the camera packed up, it was maybe the size of a marble held at arm's length. That doesn't sound big, but it was big enough to feel wrong. Too big to be that steady. And I had no frame of reference. It was just this perfect white dot hanging in the black. I stood there, not sure what to do. It stopped. Just hung in the air a little above the horizon now, maybe a few degrees above the mountains. It didn't flicker, didn't sway, didn't shift color or anything. Just there. I must have stood there for 3 or 4 minutes. It didn't move, didn't get smaller, didn't grow, just stayed fixed. Then it was gone. Not like it zipped off or blinked out, it was just gone between one breath and the next. 1 second it was there, the next second I was staring at empty sky. I blinked hard, looked all over the sky, tried to see if it had moved, but there was nothing. I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Started to tell myself I was just tired, or maybe it was a satellite and the light angle changed or some weird lens artifact. But when I got back to the truck and looked at the camera screen again, the last photo I took before packing up had it. Bright, centered, slightly blurred from motion, but definitely there. Then I noticed something else. The clock on my truck was wrong. It was behind by almost 40 minutes. I'd set it earlier that day when I filled up in 29 Palms, synced it to my phone. My phone was still in airplane mode to save battery, but when I checked it, the time didn't match the truck or my watch. All three were off from each other by different amounts. None of them had the right time. That messed with me more than anything else. I drove back toward town slowly. Every so often I pulled over and looked up, trying to see if the light had come back, but it never did. The sky looked normal again. Planes, stars, the moon. Later, when I dumped the photos onto my laptop, the metadata on the last few shots was blank. No timestamp, no exposure data, nothing. Just blank fields. I've never seen that happen before. The files were there, the images showed up, but it was like the camera had no idea when or how they were taken. The rest of the trip was normal. No more lights, no more weird timing issues. But I didn't shoot again. Just drove home the next day. I still have the photos. They look like any other star shots, except for that one series. Perfect dot, steady arc from east to center frame, then gone. I haven't camped alone since. I was out in the field behind my parents' place. They live out near the edge of town where it's mostly farmland and woods, and I'd driven up for the weekend to help my dad patch a section of roof. It was Saturday night, probably around 10:30, and I'd gone out with a blanket and a thermos to lie in the grass and look at the stars for a bit. I don't get to see them much where I live now, too much light pollution. But out there, you can see everything. It was cool out, clear sky, barely any wind. I laid flat on my back with the blanket tucked under me and just kind of zoned out watching the sky. I remember seeing Orion first, then spotting the Pleiades and Cassiopeia. Just tracing the familiar shapes, nothing unusual. I'd been out there maybe 15, 20 minutes when I noticed a tight little group of lights near the Big Dipper. I don't remember exactly how many, maybe 6 or 7, but they were faint, like stars you'd only see in a really dark sky. Nothing that jumped out right away. What made me notice them was how perfectly they were spaced. Not a perfect line, but almost like a shape. Not a real constellation, but it felt intentional somehow. At first, I assumed it was just a cluster I didn't recognize. I've seen a lot of satellite formations too, and I figured maybe it was something like that. But then I noticed the lights weren't moving like satellites, or like planes. They weren't blinking, they weren't streaking, they just kind of hovered in formation. And then slowly, really slowly, they started to shift. Not in unison. Not like they were all attached. It was more like they each started drifting apart at slightly different angles, just a few degrees at first, but it was enough to notice that they were breaking the pattern they'd been in. I sat up, watched them. They moved so slowly it was hard to tell they were moving at all unless I looked away and then looked back. Over maybe 2 minutes, they had clearly separated into 2 groups. 3 stayed clustered together, the others spread wider. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything. I hadn't noticed it before, but the field is usually buzzing at night. Crickets, tree frogs, sometimes coyotes howling way off. But it had gone completely silent. Not like I'd tuned it out. Like it had just stopped. I stood up and listened. Nothing. Not even wind. The air felt weird, too, like pressure. Not cold, not hot, just heavy somehow. I took a step back toward the house without really meaning to, still watching the lights. Then they started to move faster. Not like falling stars or anything dramatic, just a steady gliding movement, each light drifting off in its own direction, no sudden changes, no flashing. But it was clear they weren't stars. Stars don't drift out of formation like that. One of them peeled off entirely from the others and started moving in a long arc, Not straight across the sky, but a curved path that looked deliberate. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't just drifting. It looked like it was headed somewhere. I was watching that one when something flickered in my peripheral vision. I turned my head and saw a quick flash of white-blue light way off to the left, near the tree line behind the barn. Not in the sky, on the ground, or just above it. It was brief, maybe half a second, but bright enough to light up the tops of the trees. Then darkness again. I didn't move for maybe a full minute. I just stood there with my hands in my pockets, heart starting to pound, staring into the woods like I was waiting for something else to flash again. But nothing did. When I turned back to the sky, the lights were gone. All of them. I scanned everywhere. Nothing. Just regular stars. I tried to trace where they'd gone, but it was like they'd never been there. I finally grabbed the blanket and thermos and started walking back toward the house. My shoes were damp from the grass, and I remember how loud my footsteps sounded, like there was no other noise for them to blend into. Halfway to the porch, I heard this low clicking sound. Not mechanical, more like a tongue click, but fast and rhythmic. It was coming from the direction of the trees. I turned and stood there for a second, squinting toward the barn. It was pitch black past the back fence, and I couldn't see anything, but the clicking kept going. 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks again. Then nothing. Then a single long one, like a drawn-out snap. Then silence again. That's when the porch light behind me turned off. It was on when I left. My dad always leaves it on after dark. I turned back toward the house. The windows were all dark, and the front room light that had been on earlier was off too. I stood there staring at it, thinking maybe the power had gone out, but I could hear the fridge humming as soon as I stepped inside. I flipped the porch switch up and down. Nothing. Then the light blinked on by itself. I didn't go back outside. I locked the door, double-checked the back door, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of water, just trying to make sense of everything. The next morning, my dad asked if I'd unplugged the router during the night. I said no. He said the internet had gone out for about 20 minutes and the clock on the microwave had reset. I asked if the power had gone out. He said no. All the breakers were fine and nothing else in the house had reset. I told him a bit of what I'd seen, the lights moving, the clicking, but left out the part about the porch light and the flash by the woods. He just shrugged and said, maybe I saw some drones or something. I know what drones look like. I've flown a few. They don't move like that. And they don't make everything go silent. I woke up around 6 that morning. Not for any reason, just kind of blinked awake. It was quiet, no wind, no rain, just gray and still. I looked out the bedroom window like I always do, and the yard was full of birds. I thought they were feeding at first, or maybe just resting. There were a lot of them. I couldn't tell what kind from that distance. Some kind of small, black feathered bird, maybe starlings, but something about the way they were positioned felt off. I went outside in my slippers to check, thinking maybe there was a busted feeder or something that spilled seed. When I got closer, I saw they weren't moving, not a single one. They were all dead, just lying there, wings tucked in like they were asleep. Maybe 50 or 60 of them, I don't know. And they weren't scattered, they were in a ring. A near perfect one, maybe 15 feet across, just encircling the main patch of grass. None in the center, none outside it, just this one circle. I stood there for a long time. It didn't make sense. There were no feathers strewn around, no blood, no sign of predators. They looked totally intact. Their eyes weren't pecked or anything. Some had their beaks slightly open, but most didn't. It was like they all just dropped out of the sky and landed that way. I didn't touch them. I took a few photos with my phone, then went back inside and made coffee. I wasn't sure who you even call for something like that. Animal control? A local vet? It's not like I live in a big neighborhood. Just a few houses spread along a county road. No HOA, no town office. I didn't tell anyone right away. I sat with it for a bit. Eventually, I went back out with a trash bag and gloves and picked them up, just so they wouldn't draw coyotes or anything. They were stiff, like they'd been dead a while, but it hadn't even been that cold night before. The ground was dry, they didn't smell. I buried them in a shallow pit behind the shed. Later that afternoon, I flew my drone. That's kind of my hobby. I don't do it professionally or anything. I just like filming the woods and the property. I've got one of those newer DJI drones with the 4K camera. I flew it maybe 300 feet up and did a wide, slow pan of the yard and surrounding tree lines, same as I've done dozens of times. Nothing seemed weird while it was flying. No connection issues, no wind. It landed fine. I pulled the footage that evening to edit, and that's when I noticed it. There was a pixel, one bright dot that didn't move. It was up in the sky portion of the frame. Not in the center, but off to the left, maybe halfway to the edge. It was small, just one pixel, but sharp. Pure white. And it didn't move. Not when the drone turned, not when it climbed or dropped. Every frame, it stayed in the same place in the sky. It wasn't on the lens. I checked, cleaned it, reviewed other old flights. This wasn't dust, it wasn't lens flare, and it wasn't a star either. It was the middle of the day. Overcast, no sunspots, no light leaks, just that dot. I thought maybe it was a stuck pixel in the camera sensor, but it didn't show up on the menus or in stills, only in that one video. And it wasn't there in footage from the next day, even though I flew the same path. I zoomed in on it frame by frame. There was no outline, no movement, no flicker. It didn't react to changes in light, just this fixed glowing speck way up there. That night, I was sitting out on the back step with a flashlight, just looking at the patch of yard where the birds had been. I kept expecting something to come back, more birds maybe, or a fox sniffing around. But it was just quiet, no insects, no wind, even the trees weren't creaking, like everything had paused. Then I heard the hum. It wasn't loud. Barely there, really. Like when you stand near a power station and there's that background vibration you don't notice until you tune into it, except it didn't seem to be coming from anywhere. I turned in a full circle trying to find the direction, but it felt ambient, like it was in the air, not in the ground or from the house. It didn't fade in or out, it just held steady, this low electric tone just outside of hearing range. My chest buzzed with it more than my ears did. It lasted maybe 3 minutes, then it stopped. No click, no fade, just off. The dog next door barked once, and that was it. The next morning, I checked the drone again. I wanted to see if the battery had drained overnight or if any logs showed errors. Nothing. It was fine. But I noticed in the flight app there was a weird data dip around the 3-minute mark in that video. Just a blank spot in the telemetry. GPS, altitude, heading, all flatlined for about 6 seconds. Then it picked back up like nothing happened. I tried to replicate it, but couldn't. That afternoon, I called the neighbor, the one with the dog, just to ask if they'd noticed anything strange. I didn't bring up the birds. I just asked if they'd had any weird power blips or heard anything odd. She said no. But then she asked if I'd seen the lights. I said no, and she dropped it, wouldn't explain. Later that week, I flew the drone again, same path, same time of day. No pixel, no glitches, everything normal. Except now the birds avoid that patch of yard. I still get them in the trees and at the feeder, but they don't land there anymore, not even once. It's just empty. I'd been out on the lake before dawn, like I usually do, trying to get a few hours of fishing before the sun came up. The air was cold, damp, and still, no wind, no birds, just the soft splash of my oars as I rowed out past the shore. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a quiet morning to myself, the kind of peace that only comes from being out on the water before the world wakes up. I had my little boat, an old but reliable thing, with a small motor and a basic fish finder. Nothing fancy, but it got the job done. I switched on the sonar just to check the bottom and see if there was any sign of fish nearby. Usually, it'd show little blips or clusters, nothing too exciting. That morning, though, the screen lit up with something different. A big shape, slow-moving, hovering just below the surface, maybe 50 or 60 feet down. It wasn't like the usual fish or logs drifting around. This was huge. The sonar made a soft beep every time the pulse hit it, and this thing was there for several beeps, moving maybe a few feet every few seconds. Slow, steady. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was a glitch. I fiddled with the settings, zoomed in and out, adjusted the sensitivity. But the shape stayed there, moving along the same path, like it was following something or just drifting in place. I turned the boat slowly, trying to get closer, curious as hell. The sun hadn't broken the horizon yet, so the water was dark, murky, and I couldn't see anything with my eyes. As I edged toward the object, the sonar readings started to fade. The blip got smaller, less defined, then just disappeared altogether. I moved a little more, trying to follow where it should be, but the screen went blank. It was like the thing vanished. No trace left. I scanned the area for a few more minutes, turning the boat around and checking every direction. Nothing. Just empty water. I felt a little unsettled, but mostly confused. Maybe it was a trick of the sonar, some weird echo off the lake bed, or a submerged tree. I decided to head back to shore. The sky was starting to lighten, birds waking up and calling from the trees. On the way back, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something. There was nothing unusual, just the usual fog rising off the water and the soft ripple of waves against the hull. Later that day, I told a couple of the local fishermen about it. They shrugged, said sometimes sonar picks up weird things, schools of fish, big logs, or just interference. But I knew what I saw on that screen wasn't normal. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying the morning in my head, remembering how the shape didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. It didn't dart away like a fish, didn't sink to the bottom, or break apart like debris. It just moved slowly and disappeared when I tried to get close. I went back out the next morning, same time, same spot. The sonar was quiet at first, then there it was again, the big shape, moving slowly across the screen. I moved closer, steady this time, not wanting to spook whatever it was. But just like before, it vanished once I approached. I tried to record the sonar screen with my phone, but the reflection from the early light made it hard to see. I kept the video anyway, in case I needed proof or someone to look at it later. That day, the whole lake felt different. The usual sounds of water and wildlife were there, but there was this strange silence too, like the place was holding its breath. When I stopped the boat to fish, I kept looking around, half expecting to catch a glimpse of something in the water or the sky, but there was nothing. A couple of times I thought I saw ripples on the surface out of nowhere, but when I looked closer, the water was still. No boats or fish nearby. After a few hours, I turned back. The sun was higher now, and the usual day crowd was starting to show up. Kayakers, jet skis, families on the shore. The normal noise of the lake came back, but I felt kind of out of place, like I'd been somewhere else for a while. That night, I went through the video on my phone again. The shape wasn't clear, just a blurry shadow on the sonar screen, but it was definitely there, moving slow and steady. I don't know what it was, something big, something alive, or maybe not. Something that didn't want to be found. It didn't try to hurt me or even get close. Just moved quietly beneath the surface and vanished when I got near. I haven't gone back to that spot since. Sometimes when I'm out on the lake late, I think about it. The silent shape under the water, drifting just out of reach. I keep wondering if I'll ever see it again, or if it was just a one-time thing, a glitch or a trick of the sonar. Either way, it's there in my mind now, a quiet mystery beneath the waves. I was walking home late one night, like I usually do. It's about a 3-mile walk from my friend's place to mine, and I figured it was a good way to clear my head after a long day. The route's pretty quiet, some streetlights here and there, mostly empty roads, nothing sketchy. I keep my phone out to listen to music, and sometimes I check messages, but mostly it's just background noise. About halfway through the walk, I noticed my phone started losing signal. Not the usual searching thing that happens when you're really out in the sticks, but like it flickered off for a second, then came back, then gone again. At first, I thought maybe it was just a glitch or some spot with bad reception. No big deal, I kept walking. But the weird part was that this kept happening in the same exact spot. Every time I passed this one particular corner by the edge of an open field, my phone signal would drop, like clockwork. The first few times, I figured it was just a coincidence or some cell tower weirdness. But after the third time, I started to pay attention. The field next to the road was empty, just grass and some scrubby bushes, and on the horizon there was this faint glow. I mean, faint like a low, almost imperceptible light, kind of bluish but soft. It wasn't like a streetlight or anything artificial I'd seen before around there. The whole area was pretty rural, so there weren't really any big sources of light besides the moon and stars. Every time I passed that spot, my phone signal would drop right as I looked toward that glow. Then, a minute or two later, it would come back once I was out of the area. I even stopped to check the phone a couple of times, watching the signal bar disappear and reappear exactly like that. The first night it happened, I thought maybe it was just a fluke. The second night, I took a slightly different route, but I ended up passing close enough that same spot again. Same thing. Signal dropped. The glow was there, barely noticeable, but definitely there. I don't know why, but it started to make me nervous. Not in a panic way, but like my brain was trying to figure out what was going on and failing. I couldn't think of anything logical. No towers, no electronic interference nearby, nothing. It was just strange. One night, I decided to stop and watch for a bit. I leaned against a tree just past the field's edge and stared toward the horizon. The glow was steady, soft, and unlike any light I'd seen before in that area. It didn't flicker or move. Just there. My phone sat on the ground beside me, and sure enough, the signal bars disappeared. I picked it up, saw no signal, no calls, no texts, no data. I looked back up toward the light. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. A very low hum. It wasn't loud or constant, more like a faint vibration in the air. It reminded me of the sound you get near power lines, but there were no power lines anywhere close. It almost felt like the sound was coming from the field itself. I checked my phone again, signal still gone. I put the phone back down and just watched. I felt watched. Not like someone standing behind me, but like something was aware I was there, observing. I turned around slowly, scanning the area behind me. Empty road. No cars, no people. Just the night and the occasional rustle of leaves. I started to walk again, feeling the hum fading as I moved away. Signal came back once I passed the corner. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but it wasn't. It wasn't just the light or the signal dropping. It was the feeling of being in a place where something didn't belong, or maybe something was hiding, just out of sight. The next night, I took a friend with me. I wanted to see if they noticed anything. We walked together to the spot, and when we got there, my phone died again, just like before. My friend's phone didn't lose signal, though. That was weird. We both looked toward the glow. My friend said it looked like a campfire or maybe some kind of light from a far-off farm. But when I told them about the signal dropping only for me, they shrugged it off. We stayed for a few minutes, and that low hum was there again. My friend didn't seem to hear it, or if they did, they didn't say anything. We left, and I could tell my friend thought I was being a little crazy. Maybe I was. After that, I didn't want to walk that route alone anymore, but sometimes I had to. Each time the same thing happened. Signal loss, the glow, the hum. One night, I was walking back alone when I saw something move in the field. It wasn't a person or an animal, too big, too slow, just a dark shape shifting just beyond the bushes. I stopped and stared. The glow was brighter that night, but still low and soft. The shape didn't move toward me or away. It just stayed there. My phone died. I felt cold, not from the temperature, but from a sudden weight in the air. I didn't wait around. I started walking fast, heart pounding. The hum rose a little, but I didn't look back. When I got home, I checked the phone. Signal was back, normal. I haven't gone back since, but sometimes at night, when everything's quiet, I see a faint blue glow out my window, far off near the horizon. I'm not sure what I was seeing or why my phone acted the way it did. It's like that spot has something in it, something that doesn't want to be found or seen too close. And for whatever reason, it only messed with me, not anyone else. That's what makes it stick with me, even now. I didn't mean to start watching the security footage so obsessively. It just kind of happened after the first time I noticed something weird. I'd installed the cameras on my house a few years back, mostly for peace of mind, nothing fancy, just the basics. Motion detection, a few angles around the yard, the front door. Usually it was just the occasional raccoon or a cat passing through. But then about a month ago, I started seeing this low, dark shape at the edge of one of the camera's views, always at exactly 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was a glitch or maybe a shadow cast by the streetlight down the road. The shape was always on the far right edge of the frame, just barely visible, almost like it was slipping in and out of view. It didn't move much, just sort of hovered there. I didn't think too much about it until I saw it again the next night. Same time, same place. I pulled up the footage from every night to see if it showed up before, and it did. Every night for about 3 weeks. Always at 3 a.m., always that same vague shape. Sometimes it seemed to stretch out longer, other times it looked shorter, but it never came fully into frame. It was just there. I live alone out here on the edge of town, and while it's quiet, it's not completely deserted. The streetlights and my porch light are the only sources of light at night. The rest is dark trees and grass. I didn't hear anything odd during those nights. No strange noises, no footsteps or voices. What freaked me out most was how precise it was. Like someone had a timer set. The shape didn't wander around or drift off, just stayed low and close to the ground, right at the edge of the camera's sight, for exactly a few minutes. Then it vanished, like someone stepping back into the shadows. I couldn't tell what it was. It wasn't a person. No arms or legs visible. Not an animal either. The way it stayed so still felt unnatural. I wondered if it was some kind of trick of the light or a bug on the lens, but the footage was crystal clear otherwise. One night, I tried to catch it in person. I set my alarm for 2:50 a.m., sat by the window with the curtains pulled back. When 3 came around, I waited and watched that exact spot. Nothing. No shape, no shadow, nothing. The streetlight lit the area the same as always. The only difference was me waiting there, half dreading what I might see. The next morning, I checked the footage again just to be sure. And there it was. That same dark shape, like it had been there all along, even though I didn't see anything from the window. That was the first time it really got under my skin. How could it be visible on camera, but not to me standing right there? After that, I started sleeping with the blinds closed and the lights on, but the shape kept showing up. Always 3 a.m., always at the same spot. A few nights later, I thought I heard something outside. A low humming noise, very faint, almost like a vibration in the air. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. I froze, listening hard, but when I looked out the window, everything looked normal. No lights, no movement. I couldn't tell if the noise was coming from outside or inside the house. That same night, the security camera caught something else weird. The shape was there again, but this time it seemed to shift slightly forward, almost as if it was leaning or stretching toward the camera for a moment, then pulled back. I watched it frame by frame. I swear it was deliberate. I considered calling someone, the police or a local security company, but there was no threat I could point to. Nothing was stolen, no damage to the property. Just this weird shadowy shape that came out every night, not quite visible, not quite hiding. It felt like it was watching me, or waiting for something. The fact that it showed up when the rest of the neighborhood was dead silent didn't help. The house felt colder at night, even with the heater on. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking toward the window, expecting to see it out there. One morning, I woke up and realized I'd lost about 30 minutes of time. I checked my phone. I'd set an alarm for 6 a.m., but I didn't remember hearing it. My mind was fuzzy, like I'd blanked out or fallen into a weird kind of sleep. I tried to recall what happened right before I fell asleep, but everything was hazy. That day, I spent hours going through the footage again, and I noticed something subtle I'd missed before. Every time the shape appeared, the clock on the video feed would briefly flicker and glitch, like a tiny jump or a skip, just for a second. I don't know if it was a camera glitch or something else, but it felt connected. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like something was just beyond the window. I'd hear soft noises, scratching or rustling, but when I looked, nothing was there. The backyard was empty, but the feeling stayed. One night, I tried putting a flashlight in the yard, aiming it toward where the shape usually showed up. The next morning, the battery was dead. I never saw what drained it, but it happened after the shape appeared. Eventually, I stopped watching the footage all the time. It was messing with my head. But I kept checking the cameras, hoping to catch something different, some clue. Nothing ever changed. The shape came out like clockwork at 3 a.m., stayed low, stayed at the edge of the frame, never fully there, never leaving tracks or signs outside. After a few weeks, the shape disappeared completely. No more glitches, no more strange noises. The nights went back to normal quiet and my sleep got better. I never saw the shape with my own eyes, only on the camera. I can't say what it was or why it came around every night. But for a while, it felt like something was just out there, watching, waiting in the dark, right at the edge of sight. It happened about 3 years ago when I was doing overnight work for the State Highway Department. We were resurfacing a stretch of 2-lane out near Ridgeway, way out in the middle of nowhere. It was a weeknight, maybe Wednesday. Clear sky, no traffic. We worked from 9 p.m. to about 4 a.m., and most nights were dead quiet. That night was like any other. Warm, dry, no wind. Moon was maybe half full, and stars were sharp. We had cones set up along a quarter-mile stretch with floodlights at either end. I was manning the far side, where the crew trucks were parked, mostly just directing equipment in and out, keeping an eye on things. Not exactly thrilling work, but I liked the quiet. Around midnight, I stepped away from the lights to take a leak behind the equipment trailer. I was maybe 50 feet from the road, facing the trees. That's when I noticed how still everything was. No bugs, no wind, not even the usual hum from the field beyond the tree line. Just dead quiet. As I zipped up, I saw a shadow move across the gravel near my feet. At first, I thought it was just clouds, but there weren't any. Sky was completely clear. I looked up, half expecting a bird or low-flying plane. Nothing, not even a single wisp of cloud. Just stars. But the shadow was real. It wasn't fast, it sort of glided across the road from west to east, smooth and slow. Covered the width of the highway, probably wider. There was no noise, no wind, no vibration. I remember that clearly because I just stood there waiting for something. A sound, a breeze, anything. But it was silent. I watched it cross over the floodlight beams and disappear into the trees on the other side. It was shaped long and irregular, not round or winged. Kind of like the outline of something huge but not solid, like a very faint, dark filter moving between me and the stars. Once it passed, everything stayed still. No animals, no wind. It didn't leave anything behind, not even a breeze, and the air felt heavy somehow. Not cold, just weighted. I stood there for a long time. I remember checking my watch, thinking maybe 5 minutes had gone by, but it had only been 1. I walked back to the road slowly, scanning the sky the whole time. Still nothing. I asked one of the other guys if he'd seen anything, but he just shrugged, said I probably saw a bat or something. But it wasn't that. Bats don't throw shadows like that, and I know what planes sound like. This was something else. The next weird thing didn't happen until maybe an hour later. I was sitting in the truck, half dozing, when the radio clicked on for a second. Just static, and then shut off again. We hadn't used the radios all night, and they're usually pretty solid. I looked at the handheld sitting in the charger, and the screen was blank, like it had been turned off, even though I hadn't touched it. Right after that, I heard a soft metallic clank from behind the trailer. Not loud, just one of those small, deliberate sounds, someone dropping a wrench onto pavement. I got out and checked. Walked the whole length of the trailer. No one there. Nothing had fallen. Everything was right where it should have been. When I came back around, I noticed something else. The gravel right near where I'd been earlier, where I saw the shadow, looked kind of off, like the rocks had been disturbed, but only in a narrow, straight band, maybe a foot wide. The rest of the gravel was dry and dusty, but this strip looked like it had been tamped down and pressed smooth, almost melted together. I bent down to touch it. It wasn't warm, just firmer, like the surface had been compressed. I didn't tell anyone, didn't feel like trying to explain that. I just stayed in the truck for the rest of the shift, door locked, radio off. The weirdest part happened on the drive home. I finished up around 4:15, got in my truck, and started heading south on Route 12, which runs through open farmland. Just as I was coming up over a low hill, maybe 10 minutes from the site, the headlights picked up something on the left side of the road. It was a shape, tall, thin, not moving. I slowed down, thinking it was a deer or a person. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't either. It looked like a narrow post or figure, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, standing just inside the ditch. I passed it slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour, trying to get a better look without stopping. It didn't move. I only saw it for about 3 seconds, but I couldn't make out any details. Just a tall, vertical shape, dull gray, no shine or reflection. I checked my rear view, but the road behind me was empty. Nothing standing there anymore. That stretch of road has no turnoffs, no fences, nowhere something could hide. I drove home the rest of the way with the windows up and the radio off. The next day, I went back out to the site around noon just to see if the gravel still looked weird. It didn't. The whole area looked normal, like nothing had happened. The radio in the truck worked fine too. I didn't bring it up again with the crew. Nothing else weird happened that week, but I stopped volunteering for the Ridgeway shift after that. I got back from my run around 3:10 a.m., according to my phone. I know that for sure because I checked the screen as I turned the corner to my building. I'd run a little longer than usual, trying to shake off some stress. Work had been rough that week. The neighborhood's quiet enough at night, safe, and I'd done that loop probably 50 times before. But something felt off that night. It started about halfway through, maybe 15, 20 minutes in. I remember realizing I hadn't seen a single car go by. No headlights, no street noise. Even the houses were darker than usual. I run past a row of small ranch-style homes with porch lights always on. That night, every one of them was dark. I told myself I was just being weird, overthinking it. I put in my earbuds again and kept moving. It was one of those still nights. No wind, no bugs, not even the usual buzz from the streetlights. Everything felt kind of flat, like a soundproof room. I got back to my street and immediately noticed the porch light was off. I always leave it on if I know I'll be out after dark. I figured the bulb finally died. No big deal, but then I saw the front door. It was open, not all the way, but cracked just a couple inches, enough to see the edge of the hallway wall inside. I live alone. I always lock the door when I leave, even if I'm just walking to the corner store. I stood there on the sidewalk for a few seconds, not moving. No lights were on inside and there was no sound. I pulled my earbuds out and walked up slow, trying to remember if I might have forgotten to lock it, or maybe I didn't pull it shut hard enough. But I know I did. I always check it. I didn't go in right away. I leaned in and said, "Hello?" Real quiet. No answer. I pushed the door open with my knuckle, just enough to peek inside. Everything looked normal at first. Shoes by the mat, jacket hanging on the hook. I stepped in, heart going hard in my chest, and reached for the light switch. Flipped it. Nothing. That made me stop. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to adjust my eyes. It was pitch black inside. I checked my phone again. Screen lit up fine. Still showed 3:10. I used the flashlight to look around. No signs of a break-in. Nothing broken. Nothing moved. I walked through the place, every room, real slow. I checked the bathroom, kitchen, even the closet. No one there. Then I noticed the microwave clock, 2:36. I didn't think anything of it at first, probably a power flicker. But then I checked the stove, same thing, 36. I went into the bedroom, the alarm clock, 2:36, frozen. Not blinking like it had reset, just stuck like it was paused. I looked back at my phone, 3:14 now, so about a 40-minute difference. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the screen, then back at the clocks. I even turned the microwave off and on again. Nothing changed. Time just stayed stuck. I opened the clock app on my phone and let it sit next to the stove for a couple minutes. The phone ticked forward. The stove stayed at 2:36. I tried turning on a few more lights. None of them worked. I unplugged a lamp, plugged it into a different outlet. Nothing. The outlets were dead, but my phone was still at 75%. And the cell signal was fine. I went back to the front door to make sure it wasn't just a bad dream or something. Still cracked open. Porch light still off. When I stepped back inside, I heard this faint ticking sound. Not like a clock, more mechanical, irregular. I followed it, thinking maybe something was stuck in the fan or the fridge compressor was dying. It led me to the closet in the hallway. I stood outside of it for a long time, holding my phone up. The sound stopped as soon as I touched the doorknob. Just dead silence. I opened the door. Empty. Coats, vacuum cleaner, same as always. Nothing in there that could make a sound. I shut the door and stood there for a second, and right then, every light in the apartment flicked on at once. Just boom. All at once. Bright and sudden, no hum or warm-up. The clocks didn't restart. They were still frozen. I checked the time again on my phone. 3:23. I went back into the kitchen and tried turning on the TV. It worked. Everything worked. Fridge humming, ceiling fans spinning, but the clock stayed stuck. I set the microwave manually just to see. It worked fine after that. So did the oven clock and the one in the bedroom. They all started keeping time again once I reset them, just that weird freeze at 2:36. I tried to sleep, but I kept looking over at the hallway closet, like I was expecting to hear that ticking again. The next morning, I checked the breaker panel. Nothing tripped. I called the building manager just in case someone had been doing maintenance. He said no one touched anything. I still don't know how the door opened. I don't know how all the clocks could freeze like that while the rest of the apartment kept power. And I've never had an electrical issue like that before or since. The only other thing I noticed, and I didn't think much of it at the time, was this smudge on the inside of the front door, about chest height. Looked like someone had pressed their hand there, palm out, and left a faint outline. I wiped it off the next day. I was about 3 miles into the loop trail when I first noticed the humming. It was just past 5 in the morning. Still pretty dark, but the kind of dark where the sky's starting to turn that deep, early blue. I hike that trail a few times a month when I want to clear my head before work. Never seen more than a few people on it, especially that early. I like it that way. The trail cuts through forest for the first mile or so, then opens into this ridge with a view of the valley below. I'd stopped at the overlook, drank some water, then kept going. It was cold enough that I could see my breath, but not uncomfortably so. Everything felt normal until that sound started. It was low, almost more of a vibration than a sound, like when you stand near a big transformer or an idling diesel engine. Except it wasn't coming from anywhere obvious. No cars, no planes. It wasn't in the ground either. It felt like it was just in the air around me. I paused and looked around, thinking maybe someone had a generator going or something, but there was nothing, just trees and rock and that same weird hum. It wasn't constant either, it sort of pulsed like a slow rhythm. 3 or 4 seconds on, then a couple off, then back on. I remember checking my phone for a signal. 1 bar, no data. I took a few steps off the trail just to see if the sound changed. It didn't. I even turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out if it was coming from a specific direction. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes before something moved in the trees to my right. At first, I thought it was a person, the way it stepped out so smoothly, but it was a deer. Big doe, maybe 30 yards off. I froze, just out of habit, but it didn't bolt like they usually do. It didn't move at all. It just stood there, completely still. Legs stiff, ears up, not twitching or blinking. It was staring at something above the tree line, over the ridge I had just come from. Not toward me, not toward the trail. Up. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten, like everything. No wind, no birds, not even squirrels or anything. Just that pulsing hum and this deer staring up at nothing. I looked up too. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a drone or a plane, but the sky was empty. No clouds, no lights. Just stars and the faint blue of dawn coming in. The treetops were still. Nothing was moving. The deer didn't look away. I swear it didn't even blink. I watched it for what felt like 5 minutes, just waiting for it to do something. Run, turn its head, flick its tail. But it didn't. That weird frozen posture started to bother me more than the humming, like it was stuck. Or being watched too. Eventually I backed away, real slow, and started walking again. The trail curved back into the woods, and I tried to shake it off. Maybe the deer had been sick or something. Maybe there was a plane way higher up I couldn't see. I kept going, but I was more aware of everything. Every little snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me stop and look. About 10 minutes later, I came across a small clearing where the trees thin out near a rocky slope. There's a signpost there, just trail markers, and I usually stop there to rest before the last leg. As I stepped into the clearing, the humming got louder. Not painfully loud, but enough to feel it in my chest. The kind of low, dense sound that makes your stomach feel tight. And then the shadows shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. The way the early light was coming in through the trees, it cast long shadows across the clearing like usual. But they moved. Not from wind, not from anything natural. The shapes stayed still, but the light that made them shifted. like something huge had passed between the clearing and the sky. I looked up again. Still nothing, but the sound dropped out all at once. Not faded, just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I stayed frozen there, staring at the sky. My ears felt weird, like pressure changes after an elevator ride. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast ones, crunching on the gravel path. I turned around quick, but no one was there. I waited, listening, but it didn't repeat. The pressure in my ears lingered for a minute or two, then went back to normal. At that point, I seriously debated turning around and heading back, but I figured I was already most of the way through. So I kept walking, faster now. I kept glancing back over my shoulder every couple of minutes. I didn't like the feeling of being alone anymore. As I was coming around the last bend before the descent, I passed another clearing, smaller this time. Just a break in the trees where a fallen pine had opened the canopy. That's when I saw another deer. Or I thought it was. It was on the far side, maybe 40 feet away. But it wasn't standing the same way. It was crouched low, belly almost to the ground, legs bent weird. I couldn't tell if it was lying down or trying to move. But its head was up, just like the first one, and it was looking straight up. This time, I didn't look up. I just stood there, watching it, trying to make sense of how it was positioned. Something about it felt off. The limbs looked too long or too straight, like joints were bent the wrong way. The longer I stared, the more unsure I felt that it was even a deer. Then the sound came back, louder this time. Same low humming pulse, but with an edge to it, like interference or static layered over it. I started moving again, not running, but close. I didn't stop until I was past the switchbacks and could see the trailhead parking lot through the trees. I was the only car there. When I got back to the lot, the sound was gone again. Just the normal morning noises, wind in the trees, some distant bird calls. Sun was fully up now, the sky looked completely normal. I sat in the car for a while before leaving. Didn't turn the engine on right away, just sat there and watched the tree line. Nothing followed me out, but when I drove home, I kept checking the rear view the whole way. I was out behind the cabin that night because the sky was clearer than I'd seen it in years. No moon, no haze, just cold, sharp stars across the whole sky. I'd been up there a couple days already. My uncle's place in northern Arizona, way out past where the paved road ends. It's not much, just a one-room cabin, a fire pit, and a deck that looks out toward the hills. No neighbors, no cell signal, and barely enough power to charge a phone if the generator's been running. I'd brought my tripod and a little camera because I've been getting into night photography, mostly just long exposures of stars and tree lines, that kind of thing. Nothing serious. That night, I set up around 11:30, bundled in 2 jackets with a thermos and some music playing low on a Bluetooth speaker. It was below freezing, but I didn't care. The sky was incredible. Around 1 a.m., I noticed something strange in the southeast corner of the sky. There was this little grouping of lights. Not stars exactly, more like a cluster of pale dots, maybe 6 or 7 of them. They weren't blinking or anything, and they were too dim to be satellites. They were also way too high up to be aircraft. They looked like they were sitting completely still at first, but when I started paying closer attention, I realized they were moving, very, very slowly. At first I thought I was imagining it, but I lined up my camera and started a time lapse to track their motion. Over the next 10 or 15 minutes, I watched the lights shift formation, not in a smooth arc like stars rotating across the sky, and not in a straight line like something flying past. They were changing positions relative to each other, like points on a grid being rearranged. 2 moved apart slightly, while another one seemed to drift closer to the center. There was no sound. None. No wind either. It had died down after midnight. Just silence and those faint lights shifting like they were working something out between them. I checked my camera's screen and saw they were visible in the playback, but faint. That gave me a weird kind of validation, like I wasn't imagining it. I turned the music off and just watched. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like maybe 20 minutes. The lights kept rearranging. Always slowly, always with long pauses between shifts. Then one of them blinked out. I actually rubbed my eyes thinking maybe I'd looked away and missed it moving, but I hadn't. It hadn't drifted off or flown away. It was just there 1 second and gone the next. No trail, no fade, just gone. About a minute later, another one disappeared. Same thing, instant. Not in the same spot as the first either. It was one of the outer ones. Then two more vanished in quick succession. That left just three of them sitting in a rough triangle. I backed up a little and kept glancing at the camera, but the screen had gone dark. It had stopped recording. I didn't remember it running out of battery or filling the card. I walked over to check it, but it was still on, just stuck. The shutter hadn't closed, but the image had frozen. While I was fiddling with the controls, I looked up and saw another one vanish. Now there were only two. Something about that moment made my chest go tight. It wasn't dramatic, just a kind of quiet wrongness. The way they disappeared didn't follow anything I understood. They weren't falling, fading, or blinking. It was like watching pieces of sky just stop existing. I stood there, camera in hand, staring up at the last two lights. They didn't move anymore. They just hung there like they were waiting. Then the sixth one disappeared. The last light stayed up there by itself for a long time. I don't know how long. My watch had fogged over and my phone was inside the cabin charging. It felt like 10 minutes, maybe more. I just stood in the dark, listening to the absolute stillness of the forest and watching that one faint light sit alone in the sky. Then it disappeared too. I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed on the deck and looked up at the now normal sky, half expecting something else to happen, but it didn't. The stars looked normal again. No movement, no clusters, nothing out of place. I checked the camera one more time and it still wouldn't respond. I had to pull the battery out and restart it. When I got it working again, I went back through the files and found the time lapse, but the last few frames were corrupted. It cut off right before the first light vanished. The rest of the footage was intact. Trees, stars, a few faint clouds. But the part I really cared about wasn't there. I thought about driving into town the next day to check for any air traffic reports or astronomy posts online, but there's no internet up there, and I ended up staying 2 more nights. I didn't see anything else after that, just cold skies and regular stars. I still have the camera file saved, and sometimes I go back to it, trying to adjust the contrast or pull more detail from the lights. But nothing really shows up, just those pale dots barely brighter than the stars around them, and then the video ends. No sound, no reaction from the trees or anything else. It was just quiet. Too quiet. I didn't even check the camera right away. That was the weird part. I'd set it up mostly out of habit. I've got 5 trail cams around my property, some for deer, some just because I like knowing what's out there. We've got coyotes, the occasional bear, nothing unusual. I live alone just outside of Winchester, Virginia. Couple wooded acres, not remote, but quiet enough. My nearest neighbor's about half a mile off. I set the camera on the backside of the woods near an old game trail that cuts past a fallen oak. It doesn't get much traffic anymore. I hadn't pulled the card for a few weeks. It was February, cold, and I wasn't expecting much movement. That night I'd been inside watching a movie when the power flickered. Not long, maybe a second or two, just enough to kick off the TV and reset the router. I looked out the kitchen window and noticed something odd, just a glow through the trees. Not moving, not flickering like a fire. Just this pale light, like someone had set up a lantern in the woods. It didn't make sense. I walked out to the back deck, and the light was gone. No sound, no wind. Dead still out there. It was around 2 a.m., and the snow was fresh, maybe an inch that fell earlier that evening. I figured maybe headlights had bounced weird off the trees or something. Nothing else seemed off. I didn't think about it again until Sunday afternoon. I was clearing out old footage from the trail cams and got to the one by the fallen oak. There was a motion clip time-stamped the night the power had flickered, 2:03 a.m. At first it looked like nothing, just the trees, the snow, some faint branches swaying. Then this shape drifted across the frame. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't an animal, wasn't a person. It didn't walk or run or fly, it just moved through. It wasn't solid. That was the part that made my skin crawl. It gave off light, very soft white-blue light, but it didn't have edges. It looked like a stretched balloon underwater, flickering slightly, like heat above fault. The trees lit up as it passed. Not just a camera artifact, it was clearly casting light. You could see the shadows move on the trunks, the snow glowing under it. It passed through the center of the frame in less than 2 seconds. Then gone. I replayed it probably a dozen times, slowed it down. There was no sound on the camera, but I strained to hear anyway, like maybe I'd missed something. It didn't touch anything, didn't disturb snow, just moved in a straight line from the left side to the right and vanished into the woods. What struck me was the direction. It had been moving toward my house. That was the last clip recorded that night. The camera didn't pick up anything else until 2 days later. A squirrel in daylight. I left the footage alone for a bit, didn't even mention it to anyone. It just unsettled me, more than I expected. A few nights later, I was out in the shed and heard something odd. Not a noise exactly, more like a pressure shift. Like when you're driving and the air changes in a tunnel. It lasted a few seconds. I stepped outside to listen, and the woods were completely silent. No wind, no owls, not even the usual creaks from the trees, just silent and still. I walked around to where the camera had picked up that shape. Nothing looked different. Same logs, same patchy snow. I stood there for a while, then went back in. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I checked the camera again. Another clip had been recorded. This one was weirder, if that's possible. Same time, just after 2 a.m., same faint motion alert. But when I watched it, there was nothing there. No animals, no branches moving. But the trees lit up again. Same angle, same pale light sweeping across from left to right. But this time the source wasn't visible. Just the light. Like something was moving behind the camera and shining forward, but the shape never entered the frame. The trees cast long shadows toward the lens as if something bright had passed close behind. But the camera's motion sensor still triggered. That made my stomach turn a bit. The thing, whatever it was, had passed behind the camera this time. Closer to the house, I went out the next day to inspect it. There were no footprints. Snow had fallen again the night before, just a light dusting, but not enough to cover tracks completely, and nothing else had set off the camera. The battery was full, the lens was clean. That night, I stayed up, made coffee, sat by the back window with the lights off. I kept checking the trees for any movement, any glow. But nothing happened. Around 2:10, I did hear a very faint crackling sound, like twigs snapping under something light, but it only lasted a few seconds. I opened the back door and stepped onto the deck. Again, no wind, no movement. Just cold air and a faint metallic smell, like rain on old wiring. I didn't go far, just stood there listening until I couldn't feel my fingers. Then I went back inside. The next morning, the trail camera was off. I figured maybe the batteries finally died, but when I took it inside and opened the panel, they were fine. Full charge. The card was still inside. I turned it back on and it worked immediately. But there were no new clips. I replaced the batteries anyway and set it back up. That night, nothing. The next night, nothing. Then 3 days later, a new video appeared. Same time, 2:03 a.m. This one had sound. I didn't think the camera even had audio. It was cheap, an older model. But this clip had faint background noise. Not much, but enough to catch something strange. A kind of low-frequency hum, barely above a whisper, like someone humming a single note under their breath. It got louder as the clip progressed. The video itself showed the same light sweeping through the trees, but again, no shape. Just illumination, moving from left to right. The hum peaked right as the light faded, then silence again. I brought the clip into editing software to clean it up, boost the sound. There was nothing under the hum, no animal sounds, no wind, just that steady, low tone. I checked other clips from the same day, no sound on those, not even a hint. I haven't caught anything new since then. It's been over a month. The snow's melted. I still check the camera every few days, it works. Records squirrels, raccoons, the occasional deer, but no lights, no hum, no shapes. The woods seem normal again, but I've stopped going out there after dark. I was working the night shift at this remote communications outpost out in the middle of nowhere, way up in the mountains where there's barely any light pollution. My job was mostly maintenance, checking signal equipment, and just keeping an eye on the place overnight. Usually it was pretty boring, but sometimes the isolation gets to you. That night, I stepped outside around midnight to take a break. The sky was clear and full of stars. At least that's what I thought at first. I looked up, just standing there with my coffee, when I noticed something odd. The stars weren't steady. They started to move, slowly at first, like the whole sky was spinning. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me or I was just tired. I stared longer, trying to focus, and the movement kept going. The stars were rotating around some invisible center, and it was weirdly hypnotic. I pulled out my phone to check the time and maybe take a picture, but the screen's light suddenly felt too bright compared to the dark sky. That's when I realized it wasn't the stars moving at all. Something massive was slowly shifting in front of the sky. I couldn't see the edges clearly. It was just this enormous dark shape blotting out the stars as it moved. No lights, no noise. It wasn't like a plane or a satellite or anything I'd ever seen. I stood frozen, watching it glide silently overhead, covering more and more of the sky. The way it moved didn't feel natural either. It was smooth but deliberate, like it was aware it was being seen. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The wind picked up, but there was no sound coming from the shape itself. I kept looking around, half expecting to see some lights from a nearby town or other workers coming out, but I was alone. The outpost was a few miles away from anything else, so no one could have missed this. As the shape passed over, the stars behind it vanished. For a moment, the sky was just an empty blackness with no stars at all, and it felt like the air got heavier, like something was pressing down. I could see my breath, and my hands started shaking. I tried to pull out my phone again, but the screen stayed blank, like the shape was blocking any signal or electronic interference. I put the phone away, not sure if it was worth trying to record something that probably wouldn't save properly anyway. It passed overhead, moving slowly, and then, just as quietly as it came, it drifted away, letting the stars come back into view. The spinning stopped and the sky looked normal again. But I knew it wasn't normal. I went back inside and checked the security cameras around the outpost, hoping to see the shape on one of them, but the feeds all looked fine. No shadows, no moving dark shapes, just the usual empty landscape under the starry sky. I stayed inside the rest of the night, watching the sky through the window. Nothing else happened. When my shift ended, I packed up and left without saying much. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy. Even now, I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't an airplane or a drone. It didn't make a sound. The stars didn't move themselves. Something huge just drifted overhead, blocking the sky, and then vanished. I haven't gone back to that outpost since.